listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me, as usual, Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well. How are you?
You know, I'm doing okay. If you had pointed this date out to me, right? April 21st, 2024. If you had asked me in September what I'm doing, I'd probably tell you I'm doing this. We're doing our playoff preview. Flyer season is over. No big deal. If you had asked me 6 weeks ago, I'd be telling you I'm prepping for playoff games.
Right.
Maybe they would have even already played a game one. We'll talk about that as we move on. You know, we're sitting here recording on Sunday morning. As we're diving into stuff, we got a lot to get into today. The end of the Flyer season. You got a playoff preview. There may or may not have been a team that moved, and a whole lot of nonsense going into all that. We'll dive into all that in just a second. Before we do, follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. I'm trying to be a little more active over there during these playoffs. Make sure you're also following at Kevin_Durso. Follow us everywhere you find your find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Leave a like. Do all the YouTube stuff on that. So, okay. Diving right into it. We're going to start off the top of the show. We are a Flyers podcast. We're going to dive in on the end of the season here, and it ends with a disappointing loss in Washington on Tuesday night. The Flyers put themselves in this spot. You know, we kind of did a little bit of a postmortem on last week's show. We knew it was unlikely that they were going to make it at that point. They needed a very specific set of circumstances to go right. It did not, because the Detroit Red Wings just absolutely refused to let a game go in the last 10 seconds. And we had a whole bunch of circumstances with Flyers pulled the goalie in regulation, and there was a whole lot of nonsense going on. Kevin, what was going on Tuesday night?
Trying to follow a lot at one time. I mean, I think that specifically on Tuesday night, well, you know what? We can't get to Tuesday night without starting with Monday night, I think, because Monday night was really the big scoreboard watching night. And again, it's what happens when you rely on watching the scoreboard, that you need everything to go right. And the Flyers were getting one result that for majority of the night was going exactly right. You're sitting there, and at the end of the second period, it's 4-2 Montreal over Detroit. At one point in time, it was 4-1, and you're like, okay, that's
for them to hold on.
Yep. Right. You need a regulation loss there, and Detroit's a non-factor. Then you had the Washington game, Washington playing Boston, and the result didn't necessarily matter. It was only going to dictate what you needed on Tuesday against Washington. And it was just one of those games. Washington just took everything away. Boston barely, I think at one point in time I looked up, and Boston with 5 minutes left in the second period had like 10 shots on goal. That kind of night, right?
Well, and it's a Boston team that isn't really playing for a whole lot, that it may or may not have been trying to lose the Atlantic Division so they could get Toronto. We'll talk about that.
Fair. I was going to say, that's what I was going to say. It's like, I wouldn't say they weren't playing for a whole lot, because they were, well, like a division was on the line if they wanted it. I think the question is whether they wanted that or not.
They played hard in the third period of that Ottawa game. They really tried to make that game look interesting and kind of push back. They took the night off against the Capitals. That was, listen, if you're ever going to kick a player out of the league for throwing games, shout out Jonte Porter, then it would have been on a game like that, because I'm not accusing anybody of anything, but man, they were taking it easy that night.
Well, at the very least, here's what I will say, because if you're sitting here saying they tried to make the Ottawa game interesting in the third, there was nothing interesting about that game.
No, that's fair.
There was nothing interesting about that Washington-Boston game at all.
Right. No.
There was plenty interesting about the Pittsburgh-Nashville game, which should have been 4-0 at the end of or could have been 4-0 at the end of the first period. Now, see, here's the thing. You really want to talk about a team that was a no-show. The Nashville Predators, who got outshot in the first period 20-5 and could have been outscored 4-0, were sure a no-show. And yet somehow or other made that game interesting late second period. It was 3-2.
Yep. Yeah, Nashville's a good squad. Yeah.
They're a good squad. Obviously, we're going to talk about them in a little while, because we do have playoff preview to come. I don't see it with them as much, just because, and it's games like that are the reason, kind of. It's like, you pour so much into because it was well documented, by the way. They had gone on the road for a little while, and there was this big long point streak they were on. What was it, 18 games in a row or something like that? They got
something
points,
like 18 or 19, yeah.
Right. They had points in a ton of games, and it really got them solidified in the playoff race, which is great for them. I like, believe me, we've seen it over the recent years. home playoff games in Nashville are fun to
And
watch.
it's just nice to watch Barry Trotz take a non-metro team.
Kind of, yeah.
Tone, get out of the metro. Don't be in New York. Don't be in Washington. Nashville's great for you, Barry. Go. I know you're not the GM there or the coach or anything there. I know you're just kind of running the show.
Well, no, he is the GM.
He is the GM. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I know you're not. I know you're not on the bench there anymore. But thank you for not being in the Metropolitan anymore, Barry.
Fair enough. But like that kind of game worries me about them in the playoffs, because it's like you don't want to play like that going in either. Like you just don't want to see that. And so basically, bottom line though is that Monday night you weren't getting any help, and then on top of the lack of help you were getting from, well, okay, Washington won, so now it's got to be a regulation win on Tuesday, and now that Pittsburgh won, their game on Wednesday is going to matter if you win. So and they only need a point. Like
right.
if Pittsburgh would have gotten a point out of that game and lost in overtime, at least you're sitting there putting the pressure on them to have to win on Wednesday. It didn't even come to that. It was, no, they've got to lose the game in regulation on Wednesday just for you to get in. So it was already looking bleak from just those two results.
Sure.
Then throw in the fact that with 1:17 left in regulation, here comes Detroit, tie game against Montreal.
Man. I had both screens up, right? Because we're watching the Flyers game, obviously, and it's 1-1 in the third period. We'll talk.
Oh, I'm not talking about. Oh no, so you're talking about the Tuesday.
Oh, you're talking about Tuesday. Okay, yeah.
No. I'm talking. I'm talking about.
You're still
on Monday.
Right.
Because to me that really was the feeling of it, because it's like, okay, listen, if you could have taken one team out of the picture and said, listen, Pittsburgh doesn't even play, so your goal is simple for Tuesday. You go out and play to win the game in regulation. That's it.
Washington. That's it.
And then listen, let the chips fall where they may on Wednesday for putting yourself in that spot. And I'm not saying I wished for this in terms of I wanted to see it, but if Pittsburgh would have made the playoffs, it would have been so easy for me to look at the whole picture and go look at the records in the last 10 games for the Islanders and Penguins and understand exactly why both of those teams got in, if that was the case.
Well, because we talked for weeks. Nobody else wanted it. Right.
But then you looked at their records over the last 10, you go, what was it? The Islanders finished 8-1-1, I think. And then Pittsburgh would have finished something like 7-1-2.
Yeah.
And everybody else was hovering around at best. The Flyers were not.
4 or 5 wins.
4 or 5 wins.
Yep.
No wonder.
Yeah. Nobody wanted
it.
Nope. Absolutely nobody wanted it. We've talked about it for several weeks.
I'm not trying to say that you're wrong. It did feel like that for a long time. It
seemed like nobody wanted it. Right. Of course, obviously everybody wants it. But
look,
when the Flyers come out and lose to Montreal,
I'm going to pull
Columbus and Chicago.
I'm going to pull. Well, we're going to get into the predictions later, but I'm going to pull a page from what the Flyers talked about for so much of the year and apply it to the Capitals right now, which is nobody thinks they belong here, kind of, or nobody thinks they're going to do anything.
Okay.
Which, when you give a team motivation like that, just be mindful of what can happen. That's all I'm saying. I don't have it either, for what it's worth. Spoiler alert for what's coming later. I don't have it either.
Okay.
But that's where somebody and what did end up happening ultimately, because think about it. We'll get to the Tuesday game now to start with this point then. Who scored the first goal of the game?
Who did
for Washington?
It was Ovi, wasn't it?
Exactly. And that is what I've been saying for weeks, was how are they going to get there? They were going to get there if Ovechkin dragged them in like, hey, you see the way I've played the last month?
I cannot believe that he hit 30. If you told me in mid-January...
And that was, I think, 31, right?
That was 31. Yeah. But if you told me in mid-January when he was sitting on like 5 or 6 or whatever number it was at the All-Star break,
right?
Man, that dude's a mutant. He's going to pass Gretzky next year.
Well, I was about...
There's no way he's going to let himself start with 30, 40 games like he did this season. There is no shot.
It's really, really funny that you just brought that up like that, because...
Especially because they didn't make the playoffs. Oh, he's all off season. Off season.
Well, because... So, like... I'm trying to pull up his overall numbers because I want to see the...
Yeah, I think he's 40. I think he's at 850 something right now.
It is 850 something. I want to get the exact number. 853. He's at 853, which means
that goal was 853.
Right. So to tie Gretzky, he needs 41. He needs 42 for the all-time record. which is obviously attainable when you're talking about.
I was going to say, let me read all the years that Alex Ovechkin passed 42 goals because it was a lot of them.
How about the most recent one right before this year? He had 42 in 22-23.
There it is.
Need we say more?
Well, and like we talked about, he just put 20 in the last 25,
Bingo,
30
exactly.
games of the season.
To have a year like this and still finish with 31.
What did he lock up? 18 or 19 consecutive 30-goal seasons?
Something like that. And it's a record.
The NHL record, right?
Yeah. So
Obi passed the 42-goal threshold in 05-06, 06-07, 07-08, 08-09, 09-10.
It's
not
it's
10,
easier.
11, not 11-12.
Okay, fair enough.
He did in 13-14, 14-15, 15-16, 17-18, 18-19, 19-20, 21-22, and 22-23. 13 times.
Yeah, did you know
13 times?
Yeah, by the way, did you notice?
And half the seasons he didn't do it in were shortened.
I was going to say, did you notice how some of the years you skipped?
Yep.
Like you skipped 12-13 and you skipped 20-21. Gee, I wonder why, because the league didn't play more than 50 some odd games.
Oh, and the only reason I skipped those games is because they didn't play the full schedule. In 2021, he had 24 goals in 45 games. He was going to get
He was right. Sure. And same thing with the well, and actually you did mention, so in 12-13, he still got over 30.
Yep, in 48 games.
In 48.
Lunatic. That right there, by the way, that 32 goals in 48 games, that's right up there with Connor McDavid having 100 points in.
Sure. Now you know because it's Washington. There are trips to Philadelphia involved regularly.
Yep.
You're going to be looking at that schedule next year just to see if you're on the path.
You're gonna be sweating on your February, March, April.
Because let's be okay. So let's be real. 41 to tie, 42 to pass.
Probably
how long? 60 to 70 game mark.
You're nervous anytime you're playing him after mid-February.
Bingo. I was gonna say my first thought was if it's March 1st, you're on high alert right now.
And there's a chance he just comes out and puts 20 up in the first 15 and everyone gets nervous by Christmas.
Right. Trade deadline time is when you're looking you're looking around the trade deadline and you're asking yourself from about that point on, when does he come to Philly? If he does it all. Because and I do mean that, if he comes at all, because the schedule's been weird lately.
I was gonna say, I know we all complain about, they're done playing the Islanders by November or like whatever these weird scheduling funks are. I'd be okay with being done with the Capitals by Christmas next year. I don't want that to happen in Philly.
As much as you don't, there is one element from my perspective that I'm so curious about, and it would be
how full of Capitals fans that building is.
No, it's not from the fan perspective.
Oh, really? Okay.
I would want to see what media frenzy comes in.
Oh man.
Because can you imagine if he comes in with that on the line? And the rest of us, by the way, like people like me, are there to just cover the team we're there to cover.
I wonder if
they're going to have national people everywhere.
I wonder if Gretzky's going to start traveling with them, like Howe traveled with Gretzky.
I mean, he's not going to have to do it anyway until let's be realistic.
He's really close.
Well, let's be realistic. He'd probably need to be within a hat trick of it to start really making him want to go out regularly.
When he scores number 890, I think Wayne Gretzky gets his plane tickets ready.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Totally fair. Yeah.
And plane tickets. Gretzky's on a private jet. But anyway.
we're only talking about the greatest hockey player ever.
Right. Let's not pretend he's in TSA pre-check. Okay.
Yeah, you can, by the way, because you can partially see it on my screen. So I'm gonna have to replace a picture, aren't I?
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Well, no, I take none of that.
Gretzky on the other side. You're just gonna have to put Ovi up. You're just gonna have to put Ovi up under.
Well, yeah. Well, okay. And for what it's worth, by the way, nothing changes on the one side of my office here because it's completely dedicated to Gretzky. So it is a moment though that yes, I would love to add to the other side, to this side of the room, and throw in.
And you know the craziest thing, just while we're talking about kind of the goal chase here,
yeah,
Alex Ovechkin might not hold that record nearly as long as Wayne Gretzky did.
If you mean if guys
have you looked at the Austin Matthews career
track? I was gonna say, if guys regularly put up 60 to 70 goals, then yeah, we got a different story here.
and Austin Matthews is in his prime, and Ovi wasn't scoring 70. He was scoring 50s and 60s, but he wasn't scoring 70s, man.
Yeah, I hear
different
you.
animal if you're getting away with those. Okay. Anyway, so getting into the rest of this loss, Ovi does get the first goal.
Sure. Well, and I let's also give a shout out here because the other guy who I think willed them into the playoffs was Charlie Lindgren.
Oh yeah,
he played back to back and win both, and they had won Saturday too.
Yeah.
So they went on a 3-game winning streak.
And the Flyers were out shooting the Capitals this whole game. Like they were putting it on them pressure wise. For a large portion of the game.
Not really in the first period, but the second period, especially once they scored the tying goal, of which, by the way, and I'm not trying to say, like, again, we talked about this guy last week. We have a ton of respect for him, and he's a great dude. Yeah. I loved interacting with him. I don't know if there will be any in the future. There wasn't really for what it's worth, there wasn't as clear of an answer given with him as there was with. I mean, it's pretty well assumed at this point, and I think maybe they just didn't mention him by name. But
you're talking about Eric Johnson.
Yes, of all people to score the last goal of the season for the Flyers, it was Eric Johnson.
Your Nick Sealer or your Nick Walker or Sean Walker replacement.
Well, Eric. Okay, so let's do this even better. Eric Johnson scores the last goal of the Flyers season, and scores it on a deflection net front.
Yep.
Please, if you had that on your bingo card, you should go play the lottery.
I was gonna say call your lottery book because
that was one of the last things I expected. And the thing was like, I know that they tried to give the goal to Sean Couturier first or whatever. And I'm not saying Couturier wasn't there, but when a player is scored by the reaction,
the smile, yes.
Oh, absolutely. It was like, I wasn't even worried about the smile. Eric Johnson would not celebrate like that if he didn't touch that on the way in.
That's true.
Think about something for a minute too, for that kind of emotion, by the way, that's a former Stanley Cup champion who definitely knows about this time of year.
Well, and I think he's a former Stanley Cup champion who knows that he may not have too many more bites at the apple.
He didn't, for what it's worth. I don't think it means it's going to be in Philadelphia. There was definitely plenty of talk about he did say it was one of the best rooms he's ever been in, which is certainly a compliment for a guy who's played in some pretty great rooms.
Well, and that's great to hear after the last 18 months of this team. It's good to hear that an outsider coming in thinks it's a good room.
So for what it's worth, in fairness, he did not sound like he was going to be back with the Flyers per se, and I'm going to assume that without mentioning by name, the Flyers mentioned a couple others by name in exit interviews, but they kind of made it sound like the obvious guys are not coming back.
Right.
Like if you can pinpoint that it's pretty obvious they're not coming back, they're not coming back.
Is Mark Stahl on an expiring deal?
He is, and he was mentioned by name. So we'll get to him. He was mentioned by name. That's why I'm saying they mentioned 2 names. I think Briere did. Danny Briere mentioned 2 names specifically that were like basically confirming they're not going to be back. Right. And Johnson falls into the category, but wasn't mentioned by name, which I found a little interesting. But then again, you're also thinking about the logjam that they have on the blue line with like actively signed and able to play guys.
Sure.
Like let's put it this way. We have a piece of, we're kind of starting to shift from the end of the season to the
a little bit
exit interviews a little bit.
I said, we did do a lot of the memorialization on last week's show.
So all these other guys are pretty well healthy again. We did finally get some clarity on Rasmus Ristolainen.
Mm-hmm.
Had to have surgery. It was a ruptured tricep tendon, I think is what it was. Yeah. Right. So he goes and has the surgery.
Expected to be out about 3 or 4 months, ready
3 months,
for training camp,
approximately
roughly.
3 months and ready for training camp. Yeah. But there's an impression, at least from that in the beginning, and also now knowing that he was injured.
Right.
Not exactly the easiest thing to trade at that point. So a lot of the speculation there would be based around someone feeling like he's going to make a full recovery if you're going to do that.
Sure. Yeah. And at this point, your best bet, if you're going to try to move him, is probably going to be like trade deadline next year type of thing. Once
at the earliest, yeah.
Well, right. Once he can get on the ice and prove that he is healthy and that the tricep isn't a problem.
But kind of like where I'm going with that is that, so now if you're factoring him in with Nick Sealer got an extension, you've got Sanheim and York, who you're kind of building around at this point, at this given moment. You got Jamie Drysdale in a trade this year, so that's 5. Zamula is still part of this picture. You've got the grouping of the rest, if you will, in terms of Addard and Ginning and Andre and everybody who got like even a taste of it for a little bit. You're really up there with the number of guys who are available to you should they be around. And that doesn't take you out of play, I'm sure, from looking at whether it's an Eric Johnson type or somebody else, like like falling into the category of a Mark Stahl type and saying we need a guy for a year.
And the other thing, and we can touch on this as we talk about the post-season press conferences a little bit, the exit day stuff. I don't know anything. This is not coming from any sort of knowledge or, place of information.
This is just your thought process. Yeah. You're wondering.
I wouldn't be too terribly surprised if Danny Briere wants to make a bit of a bigger splash over the offseason. And
I think they'll look. And I said that a couple weeks ago when we were talking about it.
And if you're going, I'm just throwing a name out there because he's a little bit younger and theoretically available. But if you're going to look at it like a Jacob Chikrin type, that might cost you one of those young guys, one of the Andres or the Jennings or the Addards, or like one of these guys who has some potential, has some future. But if a guy like Jacob Chikrin is available right now and Danny Briere decides that your defense needs a bit of an upgrade, and again, I'm just throwing a name out there because he's a little bit younger and theoretically available.
And I hear you there.
I think Danny Briere might be a little more aggressive this offseason than he would have been a year ago.
The one thing I will throw in that kind of goes into the exit interview thing, so I think we're just shift to that at this point.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're just
the rest of that game, by the way, the Flyers ended up pulling the goalie in regulation to try to get that regulation win.
Because they felt like they had to.
Yep. As they were pulling the goalie, Detroit scored to tie the game with Montreal, send that to overtime, secure a point, which they scored with the Flyers. All right, 3.3 seconds to go.
I was going to say, can we pull back on that for a second? Because it's not just as simple as to say they just tied the game. We were actually, by that point, I was watching the other game.
I think because they were in the box. You could see it. They were full-blown turned. Danny Briere.
Yeah, but everybody knows. But everybody knows. Everybody knows that they have a way to follow it along. Like we were actually just, like I had it up on my laptop more than I was doing anything with the actual game.
Absolutely.
To the point where I'm not going to lie to you, this is how close together it was. I didn't see them pull the goalie. I saw the net empty and then basically saw immediately after, here comes TJ Oshie, who, by the way, I'm not going to sit here and say that Oshie was like the key catalyst down the stretch in terms of like Washington making it. In that game, he sure as hell was, though. That game, that was a determined TJ Oshie. I want to be in the playoffs. Get out of my way.
Very few players in recent NHL history, in my NHL lifetime, play with the heart and the grit and the clutch that TJ Oshie plays with.
And like, again, one of these likable guys who you can't help but like root for.
I hate how much I like TJ Oshie.
He's been through a ton. First of all, his injury history is very lengthy. There was everything when they won the cup in 2018.
If you bring up his dad, I'm gonna start crying. Don't even.
I know. Well, and
don't even do it.
Then you already know where I'm going with it. Then, so I won't say it. For that, but you know,
Oshie's. The story.
I mean, like, but in this particular game, he hit the post 10 seconds into the game.
Oh yeah.
You don't think that guy wasn't like looking at, we got to win a game and we're in the playoffs. I'm going to try to take this into my own hands.
The man who single-handedly carried the Olympic team in the 2014 Sochi Olympics.
That too.
2014, right?
Yeah.
Single-handedly carried them through that shootout. Every 4th of July, I go back and I watch that shootout. Just
well,
America.
So let's stay on the on the Flyers to finish them up so we can get to playoff talk, because I know we'll be here for a while with playoffs and stuff, and one other topic we want to get to.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to remember where I was at with this. So we were talking about the defenseman thing.
Yeah.
So in exit interviews, so Danny Briere said something that I think is kind of interesting when it comes to that big splash potential, or at least to look to do something that helps enhance the talent a little bit.
Yeah.
He brought up the factor he was talking about a little bit with the because little footnote for the minor league side of things, the Phantoms made the playoffs. Yeah. That's great. Great experience coming for a lot of people.
And a couple guys got sent down,
right. So now Bobby Brink gets to keep playing, Addard and Jennings get to keep playing, and there was one more,
Lixell, yeah,
who gets to keep playing. And oh, by the way, in the span of the last week or so, Alexei Kolosov is getting into goal. That matters.
Yep.
The college playoffs ended. Massimo Rizzo signs. He's going to join this in some way.
Is that national champion Massimo Rizzo?
That is University of Denver national champion.
National champion Massimo Rizzo.
Kind of fun. By the way, kind of fun because we documented it enough on the show. I was just in Denver not long ago. The University of Denver is not that far away from where we were. I did not go to the University of Denver for any reason or anything like that.
You didn't go creep on Massimo Rizzo?
Well, at the time he wasn't playing. He was actually out hurt.
Oh, okay.
And by the way, at that point in time, there was no creeping to be done because of the fact that they were already deep into the heart of the. I guess at that point in time, it would have been either conference playoffs or something that got you into the Frozen Four tournament, basically. Okay. And everything at that point was not held at the actual colleges anymore. It was
they're in bigger buildings.
They're renting out NHL quality buildings for the duration there. But it was really cool. Like he came back for the last. I think he came back for the last two. He came back for the Frozen Four games, the two that they played over that weekend, basically.
Awesome.
And Massimo Rizzo wins a national championship, and somebody else did not.
I was going to say, did he beat anybody notable? Or
he did. Now that guy made his NHL debut later, and I do want to sit there and say, for what it's worth, but hold on a second. For what it's worth, I do want to say, because I've seen it out there a lot. I know that the way that ended and all that type of stuff, and I know how people feel about it and things like that. This is going to become a situation that everybody's going to have to let it go.
And when the Ducks are tweeting out stuff like, "Oh, at least we're in the good orange and black,"
well, that was a direct throwback. That was a direct throwback because the Flyers did that with Drysdale.
Sure, but here's the thing. Anaheim, you won 27 games this year. Are you sure you're the good orange and black? Okay. Anyway, moving on. So anyway,
depend on how. Honestly, it might depend on how good he is.
Well, hopefully. Anyway, seriously. I expect him to develop a magical hamstring pull the first time they come to Philly next year. So anyway,
you want to talk about schedule makers, by the way.
Oh, they put that early. Make it the season opener.
Bingo. I was going to say they usually like to knock out some of those crazy travel games pretty early in the year.
Yeah, but I'm not. No. I don't care about the travel game.
No. I'm saying that's usually when your West Coast teams, like the Flyers, have had their home opener for a lot of games be against a team like San Jose or Vancouver or somebody like that. So you've got an opportunity to not only.
There's no shot they'll do that. I would love it.
Okay, then here's a legitimate, because this is, if there's any guy who has beaten the drum for Cutter Gauthier over the last little while. Over the year, regardless of whose property he was, let's call it that, right? Regardless, I'm putting out a message. I'm looking into the camera, and he's not going to watch this.
Okay,
he's not going to watch this. Usually, you do this with the fans, so he's not going to watch this. But I will send a message, dear John Butchergrass.
Ooh, Bucci.
You work at ESPN, who has the rights to national games.
Make it a national game.
If there is a national game you want in October, you can put the Flyers and Ducks early season on national television. Make it happen.
Absolutely. And like either building, but give it to me in Philly. Come on.
Mm-hmm.
Give it to me in Philly, Bucci. You can do it. Well, we might have to tweet that clip at him.
But because seriously, he's the college hockey guy, and embraces it. And there's a lot, definitely there's a lot to love about the college game. There are multiple great programs in this country. By the way, speaking of which, because Denver, this is Denver's second national championship in 3 years, I think. Right?
Something like that, yeah.
You know who the head coach of the University of Denver hockey team is, right?
I don't.
It's David Carl, right? Matt Carl's brother.
Oh, is it really?
Who at this point better be the next rising star of the coaching world.
I mean, you win 2 chips in 3 years. I mean, it's going to get you some attention, but all right.
He has been so good at this, at that job, and the way that he handles that program. You're literally talking about 2 national championships, and oh, by the way, the year before, in between, a regional semifinal appearance.
That's not bad. Well, and I'm interested to see where college hockey goes over the next couple of years, just because there are conversations about allowing junior players to go to college, and there's all sorts of stuff going on between the CHL and the NCAA with the whole NIL thing. Things could get very interesting in college hockey over the next several years, and college hockey is definitely becoming a more viable place for 17 and 18-year-old hockey prospects to go.
Sure. And it's still a big deal too when you get like that was the big deal with it was the big deal with Gauthier, and it's going to be a big deal with a lot of other players as well. I believe I saw this too. Now Boston College was in the national championship game also, right? I believe I saw, if I'm not mistaken, I think Ryan Leonard's going back.
Ryan Leonard's going back.
And is doing his second season and things like that. And it's like, okay, like there's an element where guys are taking an approach where it's not your typical college path where it's one and done and it's let's go pro. Some guys do, but
Rutger McGroarty might be going back for his 4th year. He might be joining the Winnipeg Jets. There's another one that's kind of up in the air.
It is, but if he doesn't, at least you understand after a junior season to a senior season, it's like, okay, I get it.
Sure.
That's where you kind of make those decisions. You're seeing like
you're nervous if you're the Jets though.
Well, you are, but you're not.
I get a little nervous on that. If you trust that he's coming to you, that's fine. But if you think he's going to pull an Adam Fox, then maybe not.
Fair enough. But either way, so let's get back to let's get this.
Back to the interviews here.
Okay. So Danny Briere made it sound like because of the amount of defensemen they have that played, I guess, at that level and that are in the minors that are right, like he kind of made it sound like there's not a single forward I can pull from the minor leagues and tell you they're ready. But defensemen, yeah, you got your Addards and Jennings and Andre and, okay, yeah, there's some names. There's guys we got to watch for, right? All right, so if you don't really have any forwards that you think you're grabbing from the minors, other than to sit there and say like the obvious choices, which is like, hey, guys who actually did play this year, like Brink and Lixell, and
I know that guys like Elliot Desnoyers and Zaid Wisdom had a little bit of a tough year.
Well, Wisdom's going to be a tough one.
He's a project. Yeah.
Well, he always was, and I think he still is, and that comes into play. Desnoyers, I don't think played enough this year.
Okay.
Like I think he dealt with some stuff, so he wasn't able to play as much, and that kind of got in the way of that, and that will do it too.
Well, and these are a lot of the guys. These are a lot of guys who most of the scouting on them was done during COVID and done during shortened or altered or canceled seasons, and there's all sorts of funky development on just a large swath of young players right now.
Sure. By the way, speaking of development of young players, the London Knights are killing it in the OHL playoffs.
Denver Barkey and Oliver Bonk, baby.
I mean, you can tell me, is it good to go 8-0 in your first 2 rounds of the playoffs?
I think it might be all right. Yeah.
Is it good to win every single game you play in the playoffs?
Yeah, and yeah.
That team is
pretty
scary.
Okay.
That team is scary good. Like I told you before, like, well, okay. So back before the Gauthier trade happened, by the way, I think I had said a couple times before, like, it's going to be a crime if that Boston College team doesn't win a national championship. And they got there, and then credit to Denver for playing a game that actually shuts them out, but I'm going to say the same thing here. It's good. At the very least, it's going to be a crime if the London Knights don't win the OHL championship,
man. And
like that team is so good.
And speaking of coaches who should be getting NHL love, how has Dale Hunter not gotten a job? Well, Dale Hunter hasn't gotten a job because him and his brother own the London Knights. But if he wanted a job at the NHL level, I'm sure Dale Hunter could get one at this point.
I mean, that they are just that organization in general just pumps them out like nobody's business. Just pumps out NHL talent. Yeah. So you sure hope that 2 of them that are on that team are, in particular, are NHL talent and quality and are going to be a key part of your team's future moving forward.
Right.
I just think, the thing is too, is like, I haven't really heard as much of Bonk's name from a scoring perspective in these playoffs, but it sure sounds like everything else is going really well. Yeah. And then Barkey, I think in 8 games has 10 points. So like, again, is that good?
It's okay. Yeah. Especially he was the leading scorer on that team. Was he not this year?
Oh, he broke 100. I know that.
I'm going to look it up here, but I believe
I don't know if he was the leading scorer because Easton Cowan had a big time year. I mean,
I'm pretty sure Denver Barkey had him passed.
The only reason he might have is because he didn't go to World Juniors. He didn't make the team, and Cowan did.
Easton Cowan had 96 points in 54 games.
Okay.
Denver Barkey had 102 in 64. So he played more games. He played 10 more games.
And it had everything to do with World Juniors.
But he did end up with 6 more points than Easton Cowan, who was a first-round pick of the Toronto Maple Leafs. And, they're looking at him for their roster next year. And
yeah, he's also older. And yeah, he's a year older, I think, right?
I think they were the same year. Were they not? Oh, no, he is a year older. You're right. It is wild to see.
Yeah, so...
no, they're both 18.
They're both 18. They did just both get drafted at the same time. It just it doesn't feel like it. The years blend together sometimes.
Easton Cowan was drafted 28th in last year's draft. Denver Barkey was drafted.
Yeah. By the way,
95th.
remember when everybody thought that was a reach?
Looks pretty good now.
Yeah, right. I mean, like everybody was like, "Who's this guy? Why'd they pick him?" Yeah, you think you know
Well,
why now?
He's picking a guy 2 rounds later who's about as good. Is that good?
Well, okay, I hear you there, but like, is picking a guy late first round who then ultimately goes on to have a point streak that was like out of this world, off the charts,
Something
like
silly. Yeah.
like just something stupid.
All right. Was there anything else that we wanted to address out of these exit interviews?
Yeah, I think so,
Okay.
because like, so far I've talked a lot about Danny Briere's side of things, and by
Yeah.
the way, so Briere's whole thing, by the way, was this, proud of the team for getting where they are, but like, first of all, by the way, Briere admitted, and I'm not saying admitted like in a negative way, like it's a negative, but like acknowledged what we all kind of said the Sean Walker trade represented, which was like, hey, listen, this might not help us make the playoffs.
Yep.
I'm doing this, and I know full well it might not help us make the playoffs, but it's what we got to do. And he's right. And I still stand by, like, he did the right thing there.
I agree. I think getting a first round pick is more helpful to your franchise than getting bounced in the first round by Carolina.
Right. So, but there was a line from Briere. Like, we're gonna shift, and I'll go to Tortorella in a second, because Tortorella there was a lot of stuff.
He's
obviously.
John Tortorella. Yep.
Sure. Well, because the entire, you could just do, like, I wrote one article on Tortorella's presser, and I wrote one article on Briere's presser, because I don't love these types of pieces, to be honest. I don't love sitting here and trying to parse through quotes and try to get everything listed out the right way, because so much gets said in an end of season press conference.
Sure.
I could have done, if I really wanted to, I probably could have done an entire article just on Tortorella and the Couturier thing. Yeah. Just on that, because it was he gave a very long answer of it, and there's certain things that he said and the way he said them that we have to talk about. But I want to start with this.
Hearing a little pissant always makes me laugh.
Well, that's true.
No, and I know that's not what you're talking about, but
this was the most interesting line from Briere, I think, because obviously both Tortorella and Briere, we're a ways away, right? And that's fair to say. I get it. Like, yeah, if you made the playoffs, you were making the playoffs barely. You are not Boston or Tampa or Toronto or Florida or the Rangers.
And even if you did make any sort of run, it would be a lightning in a bottle.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But I found this quote interesting, so I'll read this a little bit. Because this one was good to me. I still am not quite there as far as saying that we're a contender. I don't believe we're at the point where it's time to let some young assets go to try to get better quicker. We're not there yet. There's certainly a lot of players that have brought some optimism as far as believing that we're going in the right direction. We have to be careful, and I know the expectation next year will be that, we got to get into the playoffs. I don't even know that we're there yet. It was a great year, but there's still a long ways to go. We have to be very careful with that going into next year. We're not at the point where we're going to trade young assets for older veterans that are going to get us over the board. I don't think we're a Stanley Cup, blah, blah, blah. It was the first part of that second paragraph, sort of, where he shifted from the positives, the optimism, to the expectation. And I don't even know if we're at that point yet. Like, to sit there and say, just because we came up 4 points short, just because we were in the race all season and could have made the playoffs, I don't think we're even at the point where we can sit there and say, well, now the next natural step is make the playoffs.
Right.
I found that very interesting to say that, because he's right. Everybody's natural assessment is going to be, all right, you had a way better year than you thought, so the only way to go is continue to go up. You make a few changes, and from those changes, maybe you get in. I thought that was I really like that answer from Briere, because to me, it tells me that that tells me you're not satisfied with the marginal steps.
One thing I do want to say about that. How much did we know about the Cutter Gauthier trade before it happened?
We knew nothing.
How much did we know on the public side about the Carter Hart thing before it happened? Not very much.
We knew to keep an eye on something. I'll say that.
But you know what I mean. We didn't know anything that concrete.
We didn't know when. We knew possibly.
What I'm saying is that I think Danny Briere has done a pretty good job of keeping state secrets locked down.
All right. Well, see, okay. So the example I would use then for what you're trying to say is not how much did we know about the Carter Hart thing, but I would say how much did we know about Ivan Fedotov until it
There you
just
go.
happened.
There you
Right.
go.
I get your point there. It's like,
But
yeah, the Cutter Gauthier trade just showed up out of nowhere to everybody else while Briere worked on it for 6 months.
and
The
why was
Fedotov
that?
thing,
Why did that stay so quiet?
because that's the way that they handled their business.
To protect the player and to maximize the asset when the player wants out.
Right. They handled their business in a certain way that wasn't very public, and they did it with everything.
So if Danny Briere comes and sits out here and goes, "Yep, we're selling everybody. We're trading Bobby Brink and everybody. We're getting better right now," then you kind of devalue a lot of your players if the league knows that there's that much of an impetus on improving right this second.
Well, this is a good segue to the next part of like his presser, because he also said something about the thing that, so like, because basically one of the follow-up questions is that, well, how do you get more talent? And we talked about this a little bit when we did the kind of post-mortem thing a little bit. How do you get more talent when you just finished where you finished? You know, you're going to end up with what? The 12th pick, the 13th pick, something like that, probably.
Right.
So how do you get more talent when you don't have a top 5 pick and you fell short of the playoffs? You're not going to necessarily get that high end guy per se. So how do you do it?
Well,
and Briere said, Briere said that the bulk of it still needs to be done through young guys, mostly through the draft. Still believe that they can get a very talented player with the pick. Outside of that, it's tough when teams have talented players. They don't want to trade them away. So here we go. Here's the big quote. What I'm saying is more that we're probably not going to throw a lot of money at a free agent to come in and take us overboard. We're not going to trade young players for older veterans that are going to bring more talent. We're still going to respect that timeline that we've put in place. That hasn't changed. If there's a trade that makes sense that can bring more talent, and there's a way that makes sense, maybe it's a hockey trade. We're definitely open for business, and we're going to keep exploring that.
Well, and expounding on that a little bit, Elliot Friedman did his 32 Thoughts podcast, or his 32 Thoughts article.
I was going to say, is this the written version? Because I did see this yesterday.
Did roughly 40 thoughts. Had some points on the Flyers.
Sure, he did a point on every team, which was really good.
Yeah, and he usually does that after the season. He really tries to give every fan base a little something. But one of the things he mentioned was that he was not sure about Joel Farabee.
Yeah, I knew you were going to come to this at some point.
Yeah. And now, obviously, I don't know anything. I certainly don't know more than Elliot Friedman knows. But he's the kind of guy where he doesn't mention names unless he's heard that name mentioned. Now, maybe not specifically, maybe not here's the deal, maybe not they're definitely trading him, maybe not blah, blah, blah. But it sounds like Joel's name has been conversed about.
Well, let me kind of throw it to you in a different way for a second with this.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not looking at the 32 Thoughts article at this point. Did Elliot Friedman word that as because this is just my recollection. If I'm wrong, let me know.
Yeah, I'm pulling it up.
I wonder about Joel Farabee.
I believe that is what he said.
Because I'm going to tell you right now, that's just, you're right. He wouldn't necessarily throw a name out there without having heard a little bit of something potentially. But at the same time, I'm going to tell you right now, that's a conversation that's come up in the press box too. Not saying like everybody's heard something. It's look at the second half that Farabee had and how inconsistent he was and how the scoring kind of dried up for him. And it's fair to sit there and say to wonder about him. I agree with that wholeheartedly, because let's just think about the guys they have committed to. And I know Farabee technically is kind of one, but Farabee wasn't signed by Briere to an extension.
No. He's not. He's not a Danny Briere guy.
So and it doesn't matter if he is or isn't. I think they see something in him. My point is more saying, well, Tippett's not going anywhere. He signed Tippett to a big extension this year, so that's obvious. And Briere was at least a little bit more heavily involved when you were signing Sanheim or when you're signing. Trying to throw one more out here because I know there's another name. I think Briere was still around. I think also when Briere likes Couturier anyway, so I would imagine that Couturier is like part of that picture, for getting that extension in the first place. But you know what I mean.
Okay, so
Farabee is one of those, if there are two players that I wonder about, it's Farabee and it's a little bit Travis Konechny, and I'll tell you why. It's not that I don't think they think Konechny is not valuable to this or whatever. It's I heard more from both sides because Konechny talked about it a little too. More of what sounds like don't call it a sure thing that on July 1st he's getting a big extension.
Interesting.
Like we'll
Is
just
it like an I want to test free agency thing? Is it an I
No,
don't like Philadelphia thing? Is it
he said I love Philly, and I don't doubt that. I don't like I'm not saying I don't believe him there. I think that if you're looking for because I think it was the way the question was phrased, that it is there conversations? Has anything started with that? And the answer kind of was no, right?
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, for literally the follow-up quote to all of the stuff I just read that Briere gave was, the players are going to guide us in terms of where to go with this thing. I don't think we're there yet. There's still more to do before we can take the next step and start pushing the envelope. So don't you think that involves a little element of, I don't know if I should extend a year early, or at least a full year early, the guy who's 27, 28 years old, or that's the age he's going to be once he gets the extension to kick in. Yeah, I'm gonna give him 8 years right now because I know it's gonna fit our timeline. Owen Tippett, he was willing to do because Owen Tippett's 24, 25.
Right.
It's
and you're getting his whole entire prime.
Eight more years starting at 24, 25, different story. I get it. But starting
Travis Konechny, if you're looking at an 8-year deal on Travis Konechny, you're looking at least the possibility that the last 2 or 3 years of that,
well, sure, and
he's getting overpaid.
And a quick counterpoint, because guess what? You know who's even older than that? Travis Sanheim. But Danny Briere wasn't the guy at the top of the chart when
that contract got signed. So.
When that contract got signed.
By the way,
who knows?
The Elliot Friedman blurb 32 Thoughts. He wrote a bunch of stuff on the Flyers, but this is the paragraph that everyone's kind of focusing on, and I'll just read the whole little paragraph here. They're expected to announce a 2-year extension for Ivan Fedotov at any time. Good to know. And Samuel Ersson took huge steps under less than ideal conditions.
Mm-hmm.
True. A lot of their young players, from Cam York to Morgan Frost to Tyson Forrester, improved their standing. Cam Atkinson made it sound like he will start anew in 24-25. And the other one I wonder about is Joel Farabee. That is the exact phrasing he used.
But the key word there is he said wonder. So that's
but he tied it directly to Cam Atkinson's leaving, and also I wonder about Joel Farabee. That's what it sounds like to me.
Okay, and the only reason I think he's saying that and using that terminology there is because it requires more work than everybody knows. The way Cam Atkinson's not a Flyer next year. Everybody knows it. There's one.
It's the same way Ryan Johansson's not a Flyer.
Well, I that's a whole nother story.
You don't think he gets LTIR'd, Cam Atkinson?
No, I think he gets bought out.
Oh, okay. You just think they buy him out? Okay.
Yeah, it's Cam Atkinson can still play. Like, I'm not.
But so Marian Hossa could still play too, and then he developed some weird skin condition. Come on.
I don't think that Cam Atkinson wants to do that.
Okay, that's valid.
That's my point. I think Cam Atkinson thinks he can still play, and I think when it comes down to it, the Flyers are going to be like, not at that price tag, not right now, and not for who else we could play. It's time for everybody.
I bet Cam Atkinson's banged up enough that you could get him to LTIR if you really wanted him to. He's gone through enough injury in his career. You could get him there. But as it sits,
I'm just saying, to me it's a buyout. I want to go back to a couple other points that are in that then, because sure, the Fedotov 2-year deal thing.
Sure.
Here's the simple. Let's say it's not the 2-year deal is not confirmed, but he's coming back is confirmed, because
you're not going to bring him over 10 games before.
It wasn't even that. It wasn't even about that anymore. Both of them said it. Tortorella said right now, as far as I can see, it's going to be those two, and Briere basically said exactly that. It's them. Right. It's Ersson, Fedotov.
They have confidence that Fedotov will be back,
and they want Kolosov to spend an entire year in the AHL, which is exactly what we said for the last couple of weeks. That this is how it's lining up. You certainly can't judge Fedotov off of 3 appearances, 1 start, and all of the circumstances. And then you can't judge Ersson completely for having to play the amount of games he did down the stretch, right?
Right.
So it's both. Like you got to give that another year just to see if that's exactly the direction you want to go or not. And I've said before, I fully expect them with one of their 9 or 10 picks in the draft to take another goalie. I fully expect it. They've got 2 more that they just drafted that are
Carson Bjarnason in the pipeline.
Carson Bjarnason and Yegor Zavragin are both, and Zavragin, it looks like a good option as well. Bjarnason's very good for his level. for the league he's playing in. There's usually a lot of work to be done with those junior level goalies. The ones that they're pulling from, the Kolosovs and Zavragins and guys like that who are playing overseas and getting like
in
that
men's
full-on
leagues. Yeah,
exactly. They're already getting some of this. It's just about the adjustment once the time comes. But I think they're more physically prepared. Fedotov's an exception because I don't think he's as physically prepared, because how can you be when you had the last 2 years of life that you had? Like,
oh man. Yep.
The greatest thing for him is going to be, you know what? You don't have to be the guy in the playoffs. Like, and I'm saying, by saying the guy, I mean like potentially a guy. Like, it was always, if they had made it, it was always going to be Harrison. But but when you're starting to see a game slip, if you were to throw him in now, it's like you're not going to be leaned on to play in a playoff game. Now you're going to go and be able to take, what is it going to be? 4 months, 5 months, and be like,
and I wonder how Ivan Fedotov is going to handle not looking over his shoulder all the time. Like, think about what happened to this guy. He got arrested at the hockey rink and told he was dodging military service, and then they sent him to Siberia for a year.
Yeah,
like, and then you're still living in Russia, playing in Moscow for like the team.
Yeah,
it's like, how are you not looking over your shoulder every day when guys are getting pushed out windows and mysterious illnesses that you yourself have already seen?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wonder.
You've been through a lot.
Right. I wonder if just the mental offload of being able to relax really, really helps Ivan Fedotov over a summer.
Sure. And being able to work at presumably at their facilities and do all of that. Like, that's going to matter. So hopefully that's the case, So that was the first part that you brought up. I think that the second part you brought up is pretty substantial. The guys that are in good standing.
Yes.
Especially to hear at least one name in particular. Can you read me those three again? Yes. Well, sure. That's that, because there's been times where that hasn't been the case. Right?
Cam York, Morgan Frost, Tyson Forrester.
Okay, well, there's no shock there with York, because York stepped up immensely in the last half of the season.
Cam York has been great this season. And would I have liked a bit more of a robust defensive core in front of him so he didn't have to do all of that? Yeah, I would. But he has proven over the course of this year that he is already, well, of course, but he's proven over the course that he's already ready to be a top 4 defenseman in the NHL.
What I like about what he did is that there was a time, and I want to be careful how I put this, because his numbers were fine this year. He had a really solid offensive year too.
Yes.
There was a time where it felt like that had to be his path to success. You either better be putting up Norris level numbers, because
like Erik Karlsson 100-point level numbers. Right.
Well, I'm not going to go that far with it, but it's like, you better be having regular double-digit goal 50-point seasons, or what kind of defenseman are you going to be? Because it's not coming from the back end like that. You have to be activated. And I watched him down the stretch block more shots, be a little more physical, all of a sudden come into his own. And it's exactly what like everything that I want to see Jamie Drysdale. Everything I want to see Jamie Drysdale do. Exactly.
Cam York's really buying into the John Tortorella system. Like, I think you're seeing John Tortorella's hands on Cam York after 2 years at this point. Like, I think you're starting to an extent.
You are to an extent, but there's another person who I think you're seeing his hands all over this a little bit more, and kind of helping to mold a certain type of player. I think that Cam York, it seems like, or he doesn't even have to be hanging out with him that much. It just seems like he's gotten pointers from the guy and is playing a little bit more of his style. I think he's been hanging around Nick Seeler a lot more, because he's turned into a little bit more of a better offensive Nick Seeler. He's blocking shots, and with regularity. He's doing some of the dirty work on top of being able to being able to be a talented enough player offensively to put up some numbers.
When they re-signed Nick Seeler, I almost viewed that as them adding another assistant coach to the bench. Like, and not literally. I know Nick Seeler is an active member of that defense and is, frankly, for after you traded Sean Walker, he was probably your second or third best defenseman. Just given who was healthy at the time, and I know he wasn't, but you know what I mean. But he really has taken on the role of, hey, I'm going to be a mentor to these younger kids. And even though I haven't necessarily been an elite high-end NHL player, I know what it takes to be a professional. I know how to turn yourself into a well-rounded, useful defenseman. And I think he is passing that along to all these kids. And I want Nick Seeler on this team when you're Adard and Ginning are coming up, when Emile Andre comes up, when
Bonk comes into the picture.
Right. Like if Emile Andre starts next year on Nick Seeler's, like if Nick Seeler's your one defenseman and Emile Andre is the other on your third pair next year, are you upset about that?
I mean, it depends on what I see from Andre, but yeah, I got your point.
But I just mean in terms of a mentorship.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, that's why I think it works with no matter who you put him with to an extent. I mean, and it was
a Swiss Army knife too.
Absolutely. And it was hard down the stretch because everybody was trying to come back from an injury at the same time. I get it. Like literally you threw a previously injured pairing and said, go play. Because they put him with Drysdale. Right. It was Seeler Drysdale. And it's like, you know, in your most critical point of the season, that's what you're asking for. So,
and by the way, since we're here, it does seem like Drysdale is going to get a little bit more work done too.
Well, it's important to know, by the way, that it had nothing to do with the shoulder.
Right.
The shoulder's not what's getting any procedure done if there's a procedure. It's a core injury, it sounds like.
Right.
That's what Briere said about it anyway. So it's a core injury, which proceed with caution in a couple of different ways. One, obviously, it's still a procedure, and any procedure that has to happen is a procedure. So
has some risk to it. Yep.
We'll start with that. Then the second part of the equation is that we've seen guys have core muscle surgeries that don't look the same next year.
Yep. Sean Couturier, Claude Giroux, Joel Farabee.
Look, there's a big problem because like right away, like I've seen it already too. There's a lot of people that are already out on Jamie Drysdale after 6 months, and literally this guy was like the next coming of Bobby Orr when he showed up because he wanted to play here.
Because he showed up and smiled and helped the team, right?
Well, because he was bingo, because he came in and was like, I'm here, it's great to be here, blah, blah, blah. And the guy that got shipped out for him was like, I'm not playing here, blah, blah, all that stuff too, right? Like,
who will only ever be referred to as quitter.
Well, right. But like, that's my point. It's like, and now everybody's out on the guy because he suffered a shoulder injury.
So,
and then came back and didn't look as good. Like, I'm telling you the two most important things: stay healthy and bulk up. That's the two most important things. He's got a lot of work to do in other areas of his game. Defensively, he's got a ton to do. But the two most important aspects are you're going to need more physical strength to actually handle the NHL, and you're going to need to be able to stay on the ice.
That's best ability.
Is availability. But I've noticed in his style of play, I think so much more of it will come into place if he's stronger.
I agree. Well, and okay, I'm not out on Jamie Drysdale.
I'm hardly out on because I've only seen him play for 20 games.
But I'm concerned. I'm not sitting here saying it's done, it's over, it's blah, blah, blah. I think Jamie Drysdale is the first real test of the new era in terms of the medical system, right? Because we watched the Flyers medical team fail several players, right? Sam Moran comes to mind. Other guys that, should have been good, successful hockey players, and they just couldn't get them healthy. And, Nolan Patrick's a little bit different, but generally speaking,
I think Moran's a little different too, to be honest, because you get hurt in the same area so many times. Yeah, there's not much more you can do before injuries. Right. Yeah. Like it just is, it becomes what it is.
But regardless, Drysdale is the first real test of this new regime where you have a guy who is 21 years old, but already has a pretty significant injury history, has missed significant chunks of 2 seasons, has again, I'm not out. I like Jamie Drysdale a lot. I think when he's on the ice, he contributes a lot to this offense. I see him as, your power play 2 guy for the next half decade plus. I like Jamie Drysdale a lot, but he has to get healthy and he has to stay healthy. And maybe you're right. Maybe some of that is putting on a little bit more weight, being able to handle the rigors of the NHL season a little bit better. Whatever it is, he's got to figure it out. And he doesn't have a whole lot of time to figure it out, because if he misses 40 games next season, all of a sudden,
then you're talking big problems.
Right. All of a sudden, we're talking about he's missing development time. Not even just is he good, is he not good? He's 22, 23 years old and he's barely played.
Well, and it's exactly to the point about the trust issues thing that I brought up. And that's why I asked the question, because you're right. This is the first guy, it feels like, that the whole new regime has put themselves behind in terms of everybody was in agreement. If we had to do this, if we had to trade somebody who's a prospect of the level that Cutter Gauthier is, this is who we're going after. Yep. Everybody agreed to it. And by all accounts, everybody who's part of that front office made it sound like this solves a lot of problems with the blue line, that now we don't have the need to go in. Here's a perfect example for how you feel about it, or how they feel about it. They're going to pick twice in the first round of this upcoming draft. And one of the picks is going to be roughly 12th, like we said, unless they win the lottery.
Right.
And win the lottery does not mean first overall. It would mean second, I think, but still.
Right.
You get the point.
Because you can only jump 10 spots with the new lottery rules.
Even if they jump to second, they would be getting, if they jump to second,
it'd be pretty good.
Well, if they jump to second, because everybody knows who's going first, they're going to have their eyes on the other one.
Yep.
They're going to have their eyes on the other Russian if they got up to the top 5.
Man. So, and another thing
but I didn't want to go down that path right now.
Yeah.
But that's where I'm saying the trust issue thing, because if this is who you throw everything in, and you're going to say something like that in a year where the draft is beyond maybe the top 3 or 4 is primarily a good defensive draft, you're not going to find your number 1 center unless you're picking right at the top. You're not going to find your number 1 center in this draft.
Right.
So, if you're going to go after a forward with at least one of these picks,
well, I think you have to, because Danny Briere just came out and said there's no help in Lehigh Valley. I think you have to take a forward with one of these picks.
I'm just curious where they feel like they can do it, because I think you're going to get your hands potentially on a really good defenseman, even at 12, because I think that there's an element where the board is going to be all over the place, and it's everyone's self-evaluation. What if it's,
are you getting a defenseman at 12 who's better, or, is going to be a part of your team and helping better than Sanheim, York, theoretically Drysdale?
I think at the very least they can get somebody who falls into that category.
Okay.
I don't know if it's a number 1.
But I don't know if they, how many number 3 defensemen do you need?
Well, agreed, but all I'm trying to get at again is what I said last week too. It's not impossible.
Okay.
At the end of the day, think about something. The same draft year, I believe it was the same draft year. Ivan Provorov went with 1 pick in the top 10. Zach Werenski went with another pick in the top 10, and then Charlie McAvoy went, and it was the middle of the round. And
fair.
Who's got more playoff time? Who's playing big minutes in playoff games compared to the others?
Well, and that depends. I would say that depends more on development with those particular instances, but
in development. But see, how do you mean that?
You slotted Charlie McAvoy in with Brad Marchand and Zdeno Chara and Patrice Bergeron and David Pastrnak. You slotted Ivan Provorov in with the tail end of Claude Giroux's prime and
I hear. Well, you know what my problem with what you just said though is, if you're going to take Boston and then say, oh, by the way, that includes David Pastrnak, who was also picked at the spot that he was at.
Fair enough.
Then it means you're good at developing players, generally speaking, and
ding,
maybe
ding,
everybody, and maybe everybody else isn't.
Who's the last player the Flyers developed, really developed into a superstar?
Claude Giroux.
Right. And that was how long ago? And you've picked in the first round how many times since then? Right. And you've picked in the first round
to pick for you.
Right. Even though we got the name wrong.
You know what I mean, though.
Right. And that's even a guy that you took a little bit later in the round. So I will give them credit on that. But then for the next decade, you picked in the same spot and didn't turn it into anybody.
Well, fair. I'm not, that's
so
that's, But all I'm saying is that, but that's my point, is what I'm trying to get at is that it's not impossible. Everybody wants to pinpoint it on the draft position. Well, you're never going to get anybody great if you pick 15th. You're never going to get anybody great if you pick 22nd. It doesn't happen that way. They just got to be developed the right way. And now you can argue that part of the equation, that you don't like them picking in those spots because it's more work and you don't trust them to do the work. I get that part of it. I just don't like the idea that everything is going off the rails with this, and that there's no path forward with any of these guys being picked in that spot because it's never happened before.
And you have to remember that is muscle memory. That is the ghost of Bobby Clark just coming and sitting on my shoulder.
I get it. I'm just saying, all I'm trying to say is that if it's like you can either trust the new group to do things a little differently and start down that path, and it's not going to happen overnight, or
Yes.
you can and give them a chance.
Yeah.
With everybody, dry still included.
We just talked about Denver Barkey. Like, obviously, this team, this front office is doing good things. I think that the Denver Barkey pick was a good pick.
Well, I have a theory about that, though, and this is why.
Okay.
But will be like, they're not a theory, but it's like, here's the thing. Denver Barkey's looking great right now because right now they don't actively do anything with him. They just watch. He's coached by somebody else. He's playing for somebody else. Their development is their development. What happens when he plays in juniors? He plays he's top line.
Right. I expect him to be top line for the Phantoms next year, 2 years if he goes back for another year. Whatever.
He has to. He has to. He's too young to go to the Phantoms, so he's got to play
even next year. Okay.
Yeah, he's got to play one more year at the minors first. So does Bonk.
Okay.
Like Bonk and Barkey cannot play for the Phantoms next year. It's either they make the Flyers or they're going back. So they're going back.
Yeah.
But the
although I wouldn't hate giving one or both of them a little bit of that 9-game trial. Maybe not the whole thing, but
I don't think they're going to find them ready at all, though. For that,
here's the thing: if the offseason goes as Danny Briere is telling us it's going to go, right? They might not get better. They might even still be doing a little bit of trimming. They're still kind of getting their roster all figured out. If you don't expect to be good next year, what's the harm in it? There is no harm in giving those guys 2 weeks at the NHL level just to give them a little taste. I'm not saying you even play them 25 minutes a night, but you throw Denver Barkey in there, you put him in your bottom 6, you let him play 8 or 9 minutes.
But
give him a chance?
Can I counter your question with another question?
Yeah.
Because you said if they don't expect to be good next year, what's the harm? Do they not expect to be good next year?
I think Danny Briere is preparing us for them to not be good next year. And I think they would like the expectations to be that they won't be good next year. I don't know if the fan base will oblige them.
See, but there's a key to what you just said.
Okay.
They're trying to make the expectation that they won't be good because it's a perfect place to live. It's perfect. Sell low, right? Sell low expectations so that when you start overachieving, everybody goes, look how great you are.
Right.
Like that's exactly what this year was. Everybody, do you think that I'm nuts or that everybody else who said it is nuts that we all sat there and said bottom 5 and then you watch them lose 9-3 to Montreal down the stretch? That's what we thought we were getting all year.
True.
It just came up at the worst time.
Yeah, and we'll get into our playoff predictions in a minute here.
But my point being that for the rest of the year, though, we were all sitting there going, what the hell happened? I thought this was a bottom 5 team. And everybody's going to sit and go, see, this is why all the media is wrong, because they think it was going to be a terrible team. And then they missed the playoffs anyway. And we didn't end up being wrong about them missing the playoffs. We didn't end up being wrong about some of the horror shows that they got, on defense. It just came up way later than expected. That's all. It happens that way sometimes. I do want to, so I want to put the bow on the Flyer stuff as we get to the rest of it. I do want to touch on some of the Tortorella stuff because
absolutely.
Because we really haven't talked about him. We've been all about Danny Briere, which is fair because we're trying to look forward.
Well, and going into the offseason, what John Tortorella is doing doesn't really matter, right? John Tortorella gets the keys back. I know it does a little bit, but typically speaking, John Tortorella gets the keys back when training camp starts. Until then, Danny Briere is kind of the big story.
And I understand that, but so there was a lot with John Tortorella because he talked about, first and foremost, he did talk about some of the progress. He kind of wanted to shoulder the blame a little bit on how they didn't get over the top here with this, that they didn't finish what they had started. And on one hand, there's a lot of people that would sit there and say he was being accountable for his own shortcomings with that. And there's truth to that, but John Tortorella has his own way of being accountable versus what everybody else might think accountable is. Like, he'll sit there and say, I'm disappointed I couldn't do more. And at the same time go, I wouldn't change a thing. It's a little counterintuitive there, right? Like to sit there and say, I do it all the same again, but I wish there was more we could have done. Sometimes what you tried to do is a little too much or it wasn't the right direction. And you can't just sit there and say, wish there was more you could do. And then also be like, well, I would do it all over again the same way. I get the goalie thing. There wasn't much of a choice that you had. And
let's look at it realistically. Overall, looking at this season, you took out the starting goalie halfway through the season and never, ever replaced them. Not really. And
That's
then
not really on him as much.
of course not. No. And then right around your trade deadline, you lost 4 or 5 of your top 6 defensemen. Sean Walker via trade.
Sure.
Sealer, Drysdale, Ristolainen to injury. Very few teams in the NHL are going to survive those blows. Factually.
Sure. Well, let's go through, because I pulled certain things from his too, and I'll do it quick. Like, we don't really need to touch in the part where he talked about himself and where things fall on him and all that stuff like that, and the styles and all that stuff like that. That's his version of accountability.
Sure.
He talked about them being a ways away. This was an interesting line. I'll read this quote because this was an interesting quote to me. That's why it's important to be playing these games, and some guys that just weren't able to get it done. Now do you make a decision that they just can't handle it? Is that who they are, or do you continue working with them? All those conversations are going to happen in the next week or so with everybody in the organization. I have my thoughts, and that's how you build. That's how you go about it. Here's the interesting part of that, though. He's sitting here telling you now that the season's over. Do you make a decision on a guy that he can't handle it based on like 1 or 2 games? And yet he's made decisions based on 1 or 2 games in season, or sometimes based off of 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, so are we talking about Sean Couturier now then?
Well, I'll get to Couturier, but I'm talking about even the last game of the season. Last game of the season, he shortened the bench. Who'd he shorten the bench with? Morgan Frost was on the bench for the last half of the game.
Yeah.
Now, for somebody who is totally, in good standing with the organization, and I believe that from Briere's perspective, I think Danny Briere likes him. I think Keith Jones likes him. I think there's nothing wrong with that. But you're telling me that you're not like, oh, I can't make this. Like, we can't make decisions based off of guys that can't handle it based on the last little bit or like this short amount of time or whatever. But you kept putting him on the bench.
Right. You had no problem shortening your bench and sitting him on the sidelines.
Now he talked about that what they did at the deadline was right, that this is how, like, by not, like, if they wouldn't have done it, that's how you get stuck in the mud and we're a ways away and blah, blah, blah. He brought up the fact that playoff games are different, which they are. I agree with. Playoff games are different. And that's the disappointment of not getting there, is that if they would have gotten there, you would have been able to sit there and be like, okay, listen, there's a further step to development. You get that experience or whatever.
I think the experience would have been great for this team if they had managed to make it.
Now, okay, so this is a really quick one to address, and then we'll do the Couturier thing and we'll get off of this.
Yeah.
Because one of the questions we've asked a lot is, so what's his future like? What's Tortorella's future like because of the front office rumors and all stuff like that? And here's his quote: "I'm as energized as I've ever been. This team here, the organization, I love working here. I'm already thinking about next year. I just spent an hour with Danny. We just spent a half hour with Patrick Sharp and some of our analytics guys on certain players that we think we can help. I am totally in until Danny says, get the hell out of here." Okay.
I love that.
So to me, there's the answer to your question. He's coaching.
Yep. Yeah. And if he wasn't, he would have danced around it a little better than that. Like, John Tortorella doesn't really have it in him to be dishonest. So I do have to take it at face value because I love that. And another thing mentioned, it's not a huge thing, but it was mentioned that Patrick Sharp will be a little bit more involved in like the power play and stuff next year.
Well, because here's the thing. It's a valid point to bring up and sit there and say, we've got these guys in the organization at our disposal. Why wouldn't we consult with them?
Absolutely.
He's right about the fact that you're sitting there going, the general manager of the team played on power play. 2 guys in your development with Patrick Sharp and John LeClaire played on power play. They've got Danny Heatley as a scout.
Right.
Consult with people who have done it before and get some ideas.
And get your power play fixed.
Well, I just don't know if I agree with the end all be all, which is that there's no changes to the coaching staff in general. And I don't even mean like I don't think Rocky Thompson has done a bad job from a general perspective with the forwards. Like, if you liked what you saw from, hey, Bobby Brink looked decent in games and Tyson Forster looked good. Right. No. If you like that, I think he's got a role in it. And I do think that matters. I just think you shouldn't be, he should not be handling the power play that's finished last place 3 years running.
No, then the Flyers haven't had a good power play in a very long time.
The Flyers haven't had a good power play since Joe Mullen was coaching it.
Oh man, I thought you were going to say since Eric Lindros was on it.
No, because the years that Joe Mullen was coaching the power play, it was great.
That's true.
Let's talk about the Couturier stuff.
Yeah,
because that's really the bulk. He went on, like, Tortorella went on this big long whole thing with the Couturier stuff. And it was certainly a popular topic. It's going to be going forward because
He's your captain.
Well, and this is where the idea of like trying to do things differently or having no regrets or whatever, like he talks about at one point in time, and one thing I'm going to sit there and say, because I didn't include these, like this part of it in the quotes or whatever, but a couple of times, like he got asked about the front office stuff, and the start of his answer isn't "I'm all in" or whatever with like coaching or whatever. It wasn't like he just answered the question. He looks at who asks the question and then goes, "Well, let me ask you a question." So this is what I mean by playing the cards that he plays. That, you know what I mean? Like basically as if to say, well, where did that come from? Because I'm not okay, because he was trying to ask, does this have anything to do with those rumors?
Right.
And then eventually answered it. He gets asked about the Couturier stuff and starts again. Let me ask you a question. Why wouldn't I communicate with him if I'm taking him out of the lineup?
Right.
And I'm sorry, like I understand where he's trying to come from with it, but at the same time, the player literally aired it out in the media. Why don't you think anybody's going to run with that part of it? The player told the media, I know as much as you guys do.
Right.
So
it certainly seems to think that that's why we think that.
Right.
We think that because the player told us.
Well, and no, but then he went on because Kevin Kurz asked the question, and then he was the one who had the article about talking to his agent and things like that. And that's where like you brought up the pissant comment. That's where that came from, is because now and he's protecting his guy and all that stuff. Okay, whatever. Torts tried to explain it from like a standpoint of this is how I would have gone about it. And why would I want to disrespect him in that sense or whatever? You know, and then he gets asked about, do you think this could affect the relationship? And he goes, not a chance, because we communicated through it. And he goes, I know what Sean said to you guys after. It kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I think it's the first time Sean has been through something like this, so it really wasn't a big deal for me. I think it turned into a bunch of drama. You know, and then that's where the pissant comment came from again. Here's a guy pounding his chest because he doesn't really know what's going on. I get he's trying to protect him, but it turned into a situation where this is great. It turned to a situation where I get he's the captain and the timing of it all isn't great. The captaincy is not going to stop me from holding people accountable. If I determine that other players are playing better and it's going to be out and it was going on for a while, Sean had struggled for a while prior to that, I'm going to make that call. I will never, ever, especially a player of Sean, and I talked to Cam Atkinson the day before, talked to Mark Stahl, because they're veteran guys. I don't want them coming to the board and saying, I'm out. And so those conversations were had, and I'm always going to communicate in that type of situation. He goes, now whether the player agrees with it, and Sean didn't, that's what I love about him. He didn't. He disagrees. We just talked yesterday, and we disagreed on a lot of stuff. That's what I love about him. He's willing to say what's on his mind, and that's how our relationship is going to grow. If I take a guy of that stature out, I'm going to communicate what it was. I felt I did, and then we followed up after with video and tried to work that. I'm not in the business to disrespect people. I think sometimes the way I do things, I'm honest about it, and it turns into a bit of a frenzy with all this sensitivity stuff. If everyone's going to be happy coaching under me, I'm not doing my job. I want you to understand. And he was trying, and he's talking to one person, and he goes, I want you all to understand that with Sean. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, but I'm going to coach players the way I think I need to coach them. To follow up on that, and this is a fair point from his perspective, is the idea that it's not all about one player. Like the thing I want you guys to, like he goes, the thing I want you guys to understand is that I think the players do understand. I've got to coach 23 other people too. If it isn't enough, come into my office, put your fist down and say, you know what? What are you talking about? Instead of doing it with you, like meaning the media. I'm not talking about Sean's situation. If a player has a problem and this is the way I operate, I want that conversation because I have other things to worry about with other players. Which kind of circles back to the Morgan Frost.
I was about to say, that sounds to me a lot like the Morgan Frost situation that happened earlier this year, because Morgan Frost was getting scratched, getting in, then getting scratched again, and like just wasn't spending a whole lot of time in the lineup, and he thought he was playing well. And we heard rumors, I don't know if there was anything actually officially ever confirmed, that there was a little bit of I don't want to call it a dust up. There wasn't a physical altercation, but there was
he showed up, that he went in and actually talked about
a little bit of a verbal confrontation where Morgan Frost, apparently burst in the office and kind of, hey, what are you scratching me for? And they had a conversation about it. And since the moment that happened, for quite a while after that,
sure,
Morgan Frost didn't get scratched. didn't get benched in the third period, didn't get like he earned a lot of rope with John Tortorella by just coming forward and expressing his frustration. And I think if John Tortorella is not the guy who's in a city for 20 years and is best friends with everybody and, you know, is Barry Trotz in Nashville or is even like a Mike Sullivan in Pittsburgh. John Tortorella is here to get a job done. And that job is to win hockey games. He is not here to make friends. He is
and
not
it's 1,000. Yeah, and well, that's exactly what he's trying to say is that this is how I got to go about it.
I handle things on business.
Well, and it's not even that. His point is that if everybody's thrilled with me, then I'm not doing my job well enough because everybody shouldn't be thrilled with me even within that room because that's how I got to go about doing the job, right?
Absolutely.
Like I've got a certain way to do it. This is,
for the record, I love it. I love that this is the head coach of the Philadelphia Flyers. I don't want a buddy there. And he's also not a drill sergeant, right? He's not in, bag skating him to death every other day. He is there to lay the law down when the law needs to be laid down. And otherwise, if what John Tortorella says is true, which I know is something we said a bunch last week, if what John Tortorella says is true, then he does a pretty decent job of allowing that room. He allows that room to police itself, but he is kind of the big boss if there needs to be anything for the big boss to handle.
This was the point that I was trying to make before about the 2 weeks ago when we were really feeling everything and we were doing postmortem a little early for what it's worth. But nonetheless, it turned out to be true. I told you there were 3 possibilities that were sticking out in my mind. And one of them we already touched on because it had everything to do with the general manager, which was don't be surprised if they try to get involved in some conversation that brings in some more talented piece, that they go out and try to make a bit of a splash move. And by splash, I don't mean like I'm right there with what Briere was saying about it. Not an older guy, right. Like Chychrun's probably the highest level of the older guy that you're talking about. Yes. I go back to the Zegras stuff, and again, it doesn't have to be one of those 2. I'm just saying, don't be surprised if they start exploring guys in that age range and say, what can we do to get better? What can we do to change this thing around to add a piece that we feel like is going to make a difference?
Man, if the Colorado Avalanche had been able to wait till the summer to trade Bo and Byram, oh man, that would have been a guy.
Sure, that's the type of and that's the type of move you start to consider potentially, right? That was one part of it. I mentioned the other possibility that I felt like could come to fruition is about their play starting next year. Or in general next year, that it's not going to be as good as what you saw this year. That was like that the whole year was kind of lightning in a bottle to an extent. Right. And don't be surprised if there's a little bit of a regression for in a lot of ways.
I agree.
And then the third part is that if you're not in the playoff race early, if you're not talking about having some good games and success early and playing a style that makes you successful, what kind of cards does John Tortorella play that make you start thinking, is this working? Because I'm going to tell you right now, you can sit there and paint this as the thing with Couturier is over with and they're moving forward, and we'll see. You're not going to know an answer until next year. We'll see. But if you start seeing the same guys, I'm sorry, I do not want to watch a team next year come in and have to do this with, well, they're bringing back everybody. And I'm not saying it's going to be everybody legitimately, but they're bringing back guys like, okay, Couturier is obviously going to be here because he's got a long contract. And Morgan Frost comes back because the team, the front office is high on him. They like him, right?
Right.
If you're going to bring back guys like that, and then we're 10 games into the season and we're talking about guys getting benched, then you're playing the same cards again.
Yes.
And how long is this going to work before there's more than just, well, the player and the coach aren't getting along and it's the front office doesn't see it or whatever, right? Like that's all I'm trying to get at.
Sure.
Is at some point in time, it gets tired. And you can't play those cards constantly without potentially damaging what you claim you've built this year.
And that's John Tortorella's calling card throughout his career. Is typically he comes in, he has some success right away, and then year 2, year 3, when he's doing the same things but maybe not quite getting the same response out of guys, that's when he'll, something he was accused of this year. That's when he'll lose a room. And I don't think he's done it with the Flyers yet. But when you hear the same thing for the 8th, 9th, 10th time, it doesn't hold the same impact. And can he switch it up enough to kind of keep the team moving forward.
Well, and that's why I want to end this on this quote, because it was the last thing he said, and I think it's important to cover this part, because this is exactly where this is, because there were people who didn't agree with this, and like with this style of how he handled something, and he's telling you, I'm not changing myself, kind of in a way, right? As much as he's talked about evolving as a coach, he's also sitting there telling you, I wouldn't change any of this. It has to do with he got asked kind of about the messaging late in the season, if it was for a more advanced team, because they were in it, right?
Sure.
And he started off with, like, I think the style of play is one thing, because we pulled back the last 4 or 5 games. We wanted to play better in front of our goalies. The Montreal game, the Columbus game, I think it was too late. You have to pull back and worry about the grind that is the defensive part of the game. The effort part of the game, and here we go. He goes, you're talking about the Islander game? I don't take one word back from that. I do not take back anything back from that, because I think it was a situation that wasn't a complicated situation. It wasn't X's and O's, and it wasn't style of play. It was how hard you have to be. I wanted our guys to understand, and still do want them to understand, that there is a whole different level of hardness that comes with this as you start getting better as an organization. We moved along pretty well this year, probably quicker than a lot of people thought, but then we're there. I just want them to know that for probably 25, 27 minutes of that game, it was unacceptable, and I wanted it to end right there. We can't go there, or we won't have a chance. Like I said, it's right there. It was right in front of us. Why not test yourself now? Do I think we're going to the final? No, I don't. But the playoffs are there. Let's test ourselves and how hard you have to be and have to play to finish, and we didn't. Now, if that hurt people, I know it's been, if that hurt people, then we're finding out about people, because if the same thing came up again, I would do the same thing. And then I love when this happens, because he's on a roll now with the answer. So he goes, is it? Well, I'll just leave it at that. You're not going to get me because of what you think is too hard for people not to be hard. That is accountability. That is part of growing a team. As I said, you've got the wrong coach here. Then if we're going to be hugging and we were here, guys played a lousy period and a half, but that's okay. You're not going to get that from me ever. Those are decisions my management has to make if they think I made a mistake, and they say that and they say they show me the door. So be it. I'm not coming off of that, because that's how you build a hockey team. That's how you build a mindset of a team you want. I love this, by the way. That's how you build a mindset of a team that you guys want to be contenders, and that's why we're gonna go about it. I'm not coming off of that.
It feels very Jordan Belfort. I'm not leaving.
Kind of, but like at the same time, like, again, he has a way of spinning it so that it comes across as like
us versus the world.
Well, not just us versus the world, but in his mind, he's going, I would do it all the same again, because isn't that what you all want? Like, it was like, his point was, he was saying it in the media room, and he's saying it to the media, but he's also saying it to the fans. Like, don't you want it that way?
This is what you've been asking for.
You want somebody to build a contender. Well, this is how I build a contender. So this is what you want. So that's how I'm going to do it. And if everybody thinks
somebody holding your players' feet to the fire,
and if everybody thinks it's too hard, then management better show me the door.
Yep. And you know what? I think that is a great place to put a pin on the 23-24 Philadelphia Flyers season. John Tortorella looks like he will remain in charge heading into the 24.
Well, exactly. Like the follow-up is that management does think he did a great job, so he's still going to be here.
Exactly. So we will see exactly what toys Danny Briere gives John Tortorella heading into next season. But as it sits right now, it looks like pretty much everything from the coach on up is going to remain the same. So
a lot from the coach on down is probably going to remain the same too. A lot, not everything.
Well, I mean, some roster stuff is going to change.
So by the way, I didn't mention the 2 names that he said weren't coming back.
Okay, go.
We're coming back. Mark Stahl and Dennis Gurianov are not coming back.
Yeah, neither of which is really much of a surprise.
And I wouldn't be shocked if that includes your Eric Johnson type and things like that. Like,
sure.
I think they're going to look at guys like that. And that's the other part of it. Like, when we do future shows, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about what they're going to try to do. This was more about wrapping it up. And
you know who else isn't coming back, Kevin?
Oh, it's going to, yeah.
The Arizona Coyotes are not coming back to Arizona.
Yeah. I'll move on.
In case you have been living under a rock for the last 2 weeks and haven't heard this news, if you're watching on our YouTube channel, Kevin's got his Kachina, which is now currently a vintage jersey, officially speaking. So in
Tribute to
case
the
you
Coyotes.
yes, in case you've been living under a rock for the last 2 weeks, well, the last 10 years, really. The Arizona Coyotes have had a long history of difficulty with an arena, shall we say. They've been playing in Mullet Arena for 800 people for the last 3 years. I'm kidding, it's about 4,000, but still.
I hear you.
It's almost never full, so come on. And basically, the NHL is sick of Alex Morello, kind of. We'll get into that. And they have decided that Arizona is no longer a sustainable situation, given the lack of arena and the uncertainty of when they might get an arena. So in the meantime, the Arizona Coyotes franchise has been declared inactive, and all of the assets for that organization, basically everything other than the branding and the logo, have been sold to Ryan Smith, owner of the Utah Jazz, and they are moving to Salt Lake City immediately. Like officially, as far as operations go, they have already been moved to Salt Lake City.
Right. So basically everything about the Arizona Coyotes remains in terms of if and when it should come back, it comes back exactly the same.
Which I'm sure Winnipeg Jets fans love.
What the grace period to make it happen?
Well, that the Dale Howard-Chuck record stays in Arizona, and that they don't get it back.
Well, anyway,
but
so all that stuff stays. The players go, the coaching staff goes, the management goes. All of that is part of the Utah
and then as
relocation.
Much staff as Ryan Smith wants to carry over will also
go. And look, there's an element where there's definitely clearly an element where you're there's people who are out of jobs. Let's be real.
Oh, absolutely. There are people who aren't going to leave Arizona.
Well, whether it's
even if they get offered a spot and say Salt Lake City.
Well, it's twofold to an extent. It's one, whether they get off, whether they have the ability to even potentially move and just don't want to move. But it's also people like you don't think that now,
your ticket selling department,
all
these
the
people with
well, not just the business side, but I was even thinking about it from a sense of you have to make a decision on even down to your broadcasters or things like that. Your broadcasters are not a guaranteed part of that per se.
And your broadcasters were making jokes about working for Uber Eats on their last broadcast.
Right. So that kind of tells
you.
They certainly don't. But I was watching the a couple of the videos from the All City Network's Phoenix channel, basically.
Yeah.
As they were kind of going through it. And it's if you're a media person who does it too, you work in that area, that's where you live. It's I guess you could go and cover another team in that city, I guess, if you really want to, but it's
go be a Diamondbacks beat writer, I guess.
But here's the other thing, how easy is it to do that? Not in terms of not to switch sports, but that you don't already have somebody lined up for that. Seriously, you don't think that now it's they're moving to Utah. Well, Utah's got newspapers or websites that are from newspapers or something like that. You know what I mean? They've got outlets that are there. Those outlets are going to go cover it. It's not like they're just going to sit there and say, hey, the people who were in Phoenix, come work for us.
Right.
Unless you are literally going to legitimately hire somebody new.
Right.
And expand your department and say, we'll entertain the idea of interviewing those people if they want to apply for it. Again, same concept if they want to move, or whatever. But essentially somebody's job was just swept out from under them that. Right.
And then there are a couple of interesting notes on this. First, on the new Utah team, they are expected to not have a name or a logo this season.
I pull back on that.
Possibly.
Pull back on that a lot lately. That was, I think, the very initial story. And then within 24 hours, it was hey, by the way, there's a lot of trademarks.
Okay.
Basically, truth be told, an owner acting like an owner and getting to work as soon as it was made official. And hey, maybe we could have something going here. Because now think about what their real timeline is. If they really wanted to do this to that level, can you get collectively within 2 months, can you get a name, a brand, with a logo and a jersey all done so that you show up at the draft and
you don't look embarrassing.
Right. And we're ready. Simple as that.
I think there's a pretty decent chance they go to the draft without any sort of major branding. I think they might have major branding by the time the season starts.
I don't see them starting with that. I don't see them starting as the Utah Hockey Club. I'll just say it that way.
See, and I don't hate the concept of maybe for 1 year going kind of European and call them HC Utah.
I understand where you're coming from that. And the one thing I will like, because there was some criticism like, hey, listen, you've been in these talks. How are you not ready to come to the table when the sale goes through?
It's a little different.
Well, because what were they trying to do? This is the group that was going to try to be one of the next expansions.
An expansion team, right?
Well,
and expansion teams have a 3, 4, 5 year runway.
I was going to say 3 to be safe, but like 3 years to get it all put together, right? They're going to, this is what will be impressive, or at least what makes you believe, it will make you believe in this ownership that they can handle this, is if they can come to the table with all that branding done and also do what they're talking about with the arena, because they're going to renovate. It's a basketball made arena, so they're going to have to do some renovations on the place. If they can come to the table with all of that, then I give them full marks for what they, and in fairness, guess what? There's I do one of the things I want to be clear about from the start is as disappointing as it is, because I think hockey can work in Phoenix.
And I'll get back to that because
I think it can work in Phoenix. I absolutely think it's going to work in Salt Lake City or in Utah, generally speaking. I think it's going to work. Well, guess what? They got word that everything was going to happen this way and sold upwards of 20,000 season tickets.
Yep.
Right away, because and people get excited about that. And if you handle everything the right way moving forward in terms of giving it a good brand and doing all this or whatever, I think that in Phoenix, I think that I think these work. I think the brand of it works. I think it all works. I think the fans work.
Well, and what
your ownership was garbage.
You keep saying something that's very important and kind of solves the mystery of the Arizona Coyotes.
Okay.
You keep saying Phoenix.
You think they need a city?
I think they need to be in Phoenix. For the last several years, they've been in Tempe, they've been in Glendale, they've been in other cities that are not as big as Phoenix. And you go back to when the Coyotes were a real, actual, legitimate organization. I'm talking when Danny Briere played there.
Mm-hmm.
That was in Phoenix. They had a real fan base. They had all of their nonsense with their owner and their arena and all that. Most of that took place in Glendale or Tempe.
I hear you.
Just smaller cities that are not as close to your marketplace. Now, one thing I did want to mention on Arizona is that Alex Morello, the former owner of the Arizona Coyotes, has retained all that brand stuff. Like we talked about,
he's got a 5-year window to bring it back.
That's all him. He has a 5-year window to get an arena approved and get it built. It has to be built.
And one detail from the press conference that they had was that I believe Gary Bettman said there needs to be a year and a half of not window, but like a year and a half notice on their coming back.
Yes. And basically how the deal is worded is that as soon as Alex Morello has an arena that the NHL approves of, he has the right to buy back in as an expansion franchise.
And they also added in he's because he was already an NHL owner to begin with. He's pre-approved on that as well. Now, that therein lies, I think, the whole problem with the situation. I think that if I fully believe they can come back within 5 years.
Well, what happened
without him, but I think they can come back within 5 years. What
happened is Gary went to him and said, "Hey, we need you out of Arizona." And Morello said, "Okay, fine, but here's my whole list of conditions." And Gary didn't really have much of a choice. That's how I look at how this situation happened.
Yeah, but I hear you.
There is no other sport that would give a garbage owner like this a 5-year window at a second chance. There's no shot, especially when expansion fees are expected to go up and be in the neighborhood of 1.5, 1.7, $2 billion. Alex Morello was locked in at a $1 billion buy-in.
I hear you. Now here's the thing. I don't think it's as much as what you're saying when it comes to the Bettman side of it. I think it is the whole league is tired of waiting for this. You've been talking about for years getting an arena built. It hasn't happened yet. And now you're hanging on to the idea that at the end of June, you're going to win an auction for land that you'll be able to build an arena on, but it's still all it is promises. And
who does Gary Bettman work for?
Yeah, he works for the other owners. I get it.
And the other owners are sick of paying revenue sharing for a 4,000 seat arena that's half
totally empty. Totally get it. But that's what I'm saying. If your constant pitch as an owner is, I'm going to get this thing done, I'm going to get this arena built. And oh, by the way, the whole time you're gaslighting the entire fan base.
Yeah, that was really tough.
With your social media accounts of we're staying, we're not going anywhere. We're gonna want to hear about our new arena plans. Like that was ridiculous.
It's come out recently that the bigwigs in charge, the Alex Morellos, the Gary Bettmans, knew something along the lines of this was coming for maybe as much as 6 to 8 weeks. And Arizona social media has spent a lot of the last 6 to 8 weeks talking about, oh, here's the propositions for the new building. Here's this graphical design. Here's this, that,
and
the other.
And then the report came out in radio silence. Did you notice that, by the way?
Yeah. Well, and
that's basically the entire social team with 2 weeks left in the season took a vacation.
Well, and who was running it after that, right?
I didn't hear every detail. I wasn't paying super close attention.
Alex Morello's son.
Oh, well, there you go.
Hello.
Well, here's the biggest thing, because I didn't watch the whole press conference that they had where Bettman sat with Morello about this or whatever. Like, I didn't see that completely. I saw some clips.
The one where he said, I don't like the media, and Gary gave him a nasty stare, so he had to say, I don't like the limelight.
Well, in general, like, okay, so full takeaway from this one. It's really hard to make Gary Bettman look good in a press conference.
Boy,
and somehow or other, he did it.
He sure did.
Like,
okay. Let's finish up with Arizona. Arizona's done with Arizona. So for the next 5 years, we'll be waiting to see.
Right. So the summation of the end of this whole thing is that, first of all, I think hockey's going to work in Utah. I think it's going to be really cool to see the progression of this. I think it's going to add a new element to this too. Like, it's adding another city to it. I don't think they need to go. Look, I don't think the league needs to go crazy with expansion when you've got markets that are struggling. But I do think that there is.
I think they're going to go to 36 pretty reasonably.
They probably will, because they just want the money, which is why the whole thing happened anyway. I do think hockey can work in Arizona in some capacity. I do think that they'll eventually be back. The thing about it is, and this ties in a little bit to something that you actually threw in as a total footnote off the top of one of our recent shows, because you brought up what I did for my college radio station. And as I watched the last Coyotes game.
Oh, it broke my heart.
In full. I watched the whole thing because I just wanted to see it.
I watched the last couple minutes.
And as I watched it, I'm like, I drew tons of parallels. I'm like, this feels like when someone tells you something's closing up for good, and you're like, and it comes
one more time.
Well, not even that you rally up one more time, but then all of a sudden, like, as it comes to an end, it does start hitting you in the feels a lot more. Well, and you feel bad for the people that have no control. In a team's case, it's the fans. The fans didn't have, like, because seriously, if the biggest gripe about the whole situation is they don't make enough money because they play in a 5,000 seat arena, how are the fans supposed to help that?
This is not a reflection on the front office staff. This is not a reflection on the players. This is not a reflection on the fans. This is not a reflection on anybody below the C level of the Coyotes organization. The fact that they were not paying hotel bills, they were not paying rent in Glendale. That's what got him kicked out of that building to begin with.
Well, and for what it's worth, by the way, this was in the 32 Thoughts thing from Friedman also, that the two biggest things I think were brought up were having an area where the wives could gather, like a legitimate wives lounge, and better hotels. And basically Ryan Smith basically said to anybody who was asking about that, first point with the wives lounge, done, no problem. Done. And with the hotel thing, you'll stay where the Jazz stay. So the Jazz get legit hotels, obviously. So you're going to go and start staying in legitimate hotel situations.
Several embarrassing stories have come out of Arizona around this team over the last couple of years.
And it's all centered around ownership.
Exactly. And I think the most embarrassing came out within the last couple of weeks. They weren't paying for their hotel rooms. It got so bad, they were leaving so many hotel bills unpaid, that the hotel chains got together and said, hey, by the way, if you're going to stay here, we need a certified check up front because we don't trust you to pay.
Right.
So it's not a reflection on the fan base. The reason the building in Glendale was empty is because all their fans are in Phoenix and they're like several hours apart. Hello. This is entirely on ownership. If you put a team back in Phoenix, they will be absolute rock stars again. Sure.
And and not even that, like, how many people flocked to Mullet Arena for the last game knowing it was the last one, right? Like,
exactly. And I know people drove from Phoenix.
Right. And that's the point. if you give people what they really want with this and give them a better situation, it would have worked. And that's all, like, that's well. And by the way, I love your footnote that you just brought up on also that it's not the front office either. No, it's not, because did you watch the last handful of games and who they were beating? They look good.
And they've
got young talent, lots of it.
Yep. You and I were chit-chatting a little bit about jerseys before the show started, and I mentioned the Colorado Avalanche reverse retro Quebec Nordiques jersey. And
yeah,
you talked about leaning into the history, and I said, well, yeah, it's because they gave him a Stanley Cup winner the year one. Now, Arizona might not win the Cup next year, but they have Salt Lake might not win the Cup next year, but they have a really, really, really solid base down, and I could see them being a playoff team within the next couple of years and being a problem. And I feel bad for Arizona fans. Between
the forward group as long as everything sticks together, because obviously this is a big change. So as long as you can unite everybody on, okay, Salt Lake City's okay, for what's going forward.
Even though they spent the whole last game chanting Salt Lake sucks.
Well, that's the fans that are losing.
No,
the team,
I
know. That's also fair.
And the built-in rivalry if the Coyotes do come back, by the way.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you have all these young players that I think, between Cooley down the middle, Dylan Guenther, certainly, and this was one of the most talked about points, was that because most of sure, maybe there was things going on behind the scenes, like with Bettman and all that stuff for weeks on end. I get it. But most of the public didn't know this was really actually happening until about 2 weeks before it happened, right?
Most of the public was really excited because Shane Doan's kid was coming up.
But that's the point.
Yep.
Is once you find out that this was also happening, doesn't it make the fact that doesn't it make the fact that Josh Doan did get a chance to come up and actually play in that jersey and score his first NHL goal in that jersey? When, listen, you're talking a 5-year window, right? Yep. There's no guarantees the 5-year window happens. At that point in time, he's not property of the Arizona Coyotes anymore, Phoenix or whatever they're going to be anymore anyway. And who's to say he doesn't go play somewhere else beyond that anyway? Sure. Literally, you're talking about the kid who grew up with the Phoenix Coyotes, played for Arizona State University.
In that building. Which is hilarious.
And then comes in and in a home game, no less, with Shane Doan sitting right there to watch the whole thing.
Yep.
Scores his first NHL goal in his first NHL game. That's poetry for you.
If Arizona fans can find any peace in this situation, I hope that they found some peace with that one. So, okay.
And I certainly hope that as an Arizona guy, as Josh Doan is going to be from here on out, root for the kid.
Absolutely.
Root for the kid going forward, because there's absolutely every reason to. He seems like a great kid, and he's definitely got some talent. So.
Absolutely. So as we move forward here, we're going to do something a little bit different for this show. We're actually going to take a brief break, and then we're going to come right back with our round 1 playoff previews. As we do that, make sure to follow us on social media at YWT Podcast. Kevin is at Kevin_Durso. Find us everywhere you find your podcast. We'll be right back after this break. And we're back with our playoff preview here. We are going to start in the Metro Division. The first series that we have to talk about. If you're watching on our YouTube channel, by the way, Kevin's got some jerseys up behind him. We have the Metropolitan divisions behind him. We're going to start over Kevin's right shoulder, if I'm doing this correctly, with Rangers Capitals. The Hurricanes and Islanders have already played game 1. It was on Saturday night. We're recording on Sunday morning. We will talk about that. We will acknowledge that when we get into that series, but starting with Rangers Capitals. Capitals are the team that, broke the Flyers' hearts by getting in, even though the Flyers did it to themselves. They go up against the number 1 seed in the East, the President's Trophy winning New York Rangers. Where do you see this series going?
I alluded to it earlier. I see the Rangers winning the series. Look, maybe I'm a big doubter, right? Maybe I'm just a big doubter of the Capitals, and I don't see it happening. Look,
I think this is your shortest series of the first round. I'll go ahead and say that.
Then I'll fine. We're doing teasers all this whole thing, right? If that's the first series you want to talk about, here's a teaser for you. It's the only series I have going less than 6.
You know what? I am actually the exact same way. I think on my bracket I went 5 for the other series we're about to talk about in this division. But as of right now, I do have the Capitals just winning 1 game. It might be game 1, because here's my thing, right? The Rangers have been the better team all season long, but they've also been kind of coasting the last couple weeks because they haven't really needed to gut it.
That's an interesting point. I understand where you're coming from with that. I do feel like
The
the Rangers
Washington-
actually had something to play for a little bit down the stretch, though, too.
Right.
So,
But the Washington Capitals, even though they didn't do well in terms of their win-loss record, they have been playing, must-win type games for about a month now.
right. I think that this is a I have it in 5 as you got it in 5 as well. I take it.
Yep.
Yeah. And now I'm going to go opposite what you said. I don't think they win game 1 at all. I think the Rangers win game 1, and that sets the tone.
Okay. You think they steal one of the games in Washington more likely?
Probably. I mean, it'll just depend on what kind of performance you get. I'm kind of curious to see how they look, like Washington looks, having to play. They played 3-4, won 3-4, just to get into the thing.
Who did you mention when we were talking about it? You mentioned how good the goalies looked.
Well, that's exactly where I was going with it. It's like I need to see how he looks from day one. Like in fairness, it's a totally different animal now.
Yep. And the crazy thing about the playoffs is if your goalie's hot, you can do some damage.
Sure. And here's also something that I kind of wonder about too, is that if Washington starts to run around in a series where they get in penalty trouble, that's where I think they could get destroyed in this series. Like the power play that the Rangers have is very lethal. I think that could be a problem, especially if Artemi Panarin stays on that hot streak he was on at the end of the year. He was really lighting it up at the end.
Who commits the bigger war crime, Matt Rempe or Tom Wilson?
Probably Wilson, because I don't know if Rempe plays every game.
I don't think he needs to play every game to commit heinous acts of violence.
I understand that. I think there's a greater chance that Wilson does something that you qualify as questionable.
Okay.
And that you would ultimately sit there and go, that didn't help matters,
That's true.
I think there's enough guidance in that Ranger locker room too that would be like, listen, kid, rein it in a little. Yeah. Like don't do something stupid. We're a better team. Don't do something stupid. Fight a guy to change the momentum. Fine. Don't do something stupid.
Yeah, I'll tease a little bit here. I don't have the Rangers winning the cup, but I do.
I don't either.
But I do definitely have them beating the Capitals. I think we both have 5 games on this one.
Yep. I took Rangers in 5.
All right. Yep.
By the way, before we go any further, really quick, since we're doing this off the top, I teased this a little bit, but I did go back and find all of our playoff team predictions at the start as well. I'll you know what? I'll say how we did in the West when we get to the West, because we'll do that later. In the East, both of us had 5 of the 8 playoff teams. We were both wrong on Pittsburgh. Yeah, both wrong on Pittsburgh, both wrong on New Jersey, and both wrong on Buffalo. I had Boston in, you didn't. You had the Islanders in, I didn't.
Okay. Interesting.
Speaking of the Islanders, by the way, are we moving to that series?
Speaking of the Islanders, let's get into that matchup. They are down 1 game. The Carolina Hurricanes won game 1 on Saturday night in Raleigh. As I previously mentioned, I also have this series going 5 games.
Interesting.
I think these are similar teams. I think kind of built on defense, but have recently started high flying a little bit more. Carolina's finally getting a little bit of offense going. You add a guy like Jake Gensel at the trade deadline. Frederick Anderson has looked really, really good since he's come back from injury.
Sure.
On the other side of things, we had the New York Islanders, who for years and years and years under Barry Trotz were just slow and defensive, and Patrick Waugh has opened that up a little bit. They are still kind of built on that defense, but I think Carolina is just a better version of what the Islanders are at this point in time.
Here's the interesting thing, because last week you tried to tell me that this was gonna be a 7-game series of 7-1-0 games.
I mean, in game 1 kind of felt like
was almost that. Game 1 was a 2-1 game for most of it, right? Right. Well, really, 1-1.
So 1-1 game for the most of it with a
I have it go because of that, and honestly, I feel better about my pick watching game 1 a little bit. I have it going 6. Okay. I do still have the same team you do winning it. I don't think there's any craziness there. It feels like Carolina is going to prevail as the better team, but I do have it going 6. I think the Islanders put up a little bit more of a fight. That it's just all the other background of it. It's the defensive style that they are known to play. It's the Patrick Waugh effect on this a little bit. I still think that Rod Brindamore and company, they have the better team overall. I think that's what's going to get them on to the next round. But Yeah, but I'm right there with you on everything else. It's just I have it going one game longer than you do, probably.
All I want to see out of this series,
Is
I don't really care what happens on the ice. I really don't.
is it going to involve the
one time during this season, I want to see Rod Brindamore and Patrick Waugh get in each other's faces a little bit. I want them at the glass pointing and yelling just a little bit, because my goodness, that would be entertaining.
We'll see. We kind of got a mild version of that in game one. It was a lot more of what you expect. So we'll see. We'll
Patrick Waugh was breaking the glass in his first game as Avalanche head coach all those years ago.
I know.
Come on, give it to me.
Here's the thing, though. He's had a little bit of time to coach in different levels and things like that. I wonder if he's
still
mellowed.
A lunatic. No,
I think he's mellowed out a little bit.
You're telling me dealing with junior parents made him calmer?
I don't know.
Listen, and Rod Brindamore might be one of the very few coaches in the league who can physically stand up to Patrick Waugh. I think that guy has a workout routine.
Yeah, the guy has a workout routine that's pretty.
The guy outworks half his players.
Robust. Yeah,
if you listen to them, he's in the gym before them and after them.
Yeah, it's pretty robust. I'll give you that. So
all right. So you
went
Rangers, Carolina going through here.
Right. So we both went Rangers in 5. You went Carolina in 5. I went Carolina in 6 for this one. Just
all right.
I like all the same things you do about Carolina. They've got the better depth. They've got, if they can get more scoring. And by the way, to start the series off, the first goal is Evgeny Kuznetsov, who is again another one of those additions.
Incredible to see.
Yeah, so it's like right away that pays dividends right away.
And he hit the bird right away because of course he did.
But it's even down to, like, again, who scored the game-winning goal of game 1? It's Stefan Nason. It's not even one of those guys that's at the forefront of this thing. It's not an Aho. It's not a Gensel. It's not a Svechnikov. No, it's Stefan Nason. Like,
yep. And I think we have 2 tough, gritty, physical series that we come to expect out of the Metro.
With all due respect to the Capitals and the Islanders, I've been saying for a while in my head anyway.
Yeah.
Could we just fast forward to the second round where top
these
two
teams
meet?
Play each other?
Right. Because it just felt like this. It feels like this is so obvious that, and now that we say that, someone's going to make a series out of one of these, obviously.
Well, and both the Capitals and the Islanders do have the ability to grind out a couple of wins and make things interesting here.
Sure.
So, speaking of grinding things out, that will do it for the Metropolitan Division. And we get to
shift gears to the Atlantic, right?
Maybe the most contentious division in the sport. We're gonna be right back with the Atlantic Division. All right, and we are back with our Atlantic Division preview here. We're going to start once again. Oh, Kevin, you mixed it up a little bit on me. You put the division winner on the other side this time. So we're going to start over your left shoulder this time.
Oh, we want to go over here. You want to go to this one?
Yep. We're going to start with the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning. The Tampa Bay Lightning were your wild card team. We have the Battle of Florida.
That's already fun.
I know. And honestly, this is the game that we are hustling to get this show finished for, because game 1 starts in about 45 minutes. So we are definitely trying to get through this before this game starts. Florida Panthers made it to the Stanley Cup final last year.
Mm-hmm.
Magical run. Matthew Tkachuk looked great. Sam Reinhart looked great. Sam Reinhart followed it up with putting another 50 goals up this season.
Dude followed it up by getting paid this offseason.
Oh yeah. They go up against the Tampa Bay Lightning, who obviously, everyone knows the history on them.
Sure.
Went out early last year, but the 3 previous years before that won the Stanley Cup. Theoretically, they're back and hungry and ready to make a bit of a deeper run. What do you got on this one?
Well, I'm going to start with the Flyers perspective really quick, because we do the rest of the show as a Flyers podcast.
Yeah.
Everybody should be rooting for the Tampa Bay Lightning to win because it helps the pick.
Yes, that is true.
Have Florida's first round pick, so you're rooting for Tampa probably in this. Unfortunately for everybody who's rooting for that, I don't see it that way.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong. This is a tough one, because if there's any team that's got the experience to get further, it's Tampa. But I do think Florida learned a lot last year too. Yeah, I still think Florida's got the edge here. I think they've got the deeper roster after all of this anymore. It just feels like it's right. I kind of wonder, it's interesting. You got 2 goalies with a lot of mileage both ways.
Yeah.
I don't even know really who holds the goaltending edge here. It's kind of 2 really evenly matched teams, isn't it? That's why I think we're looking forward to it, is that it's 2 really evenly matched teams
who don't like each other. Like, isn't that what the playoffs is for?
Well, I love the fact that you're getting a good geographic kind of rivalry early.
This is the closest in terms of heat and hatred, I feel like this is the closest we've gotten in a while to Flyers Penguins 2012.
When you say heat, you're not just talking about the state that they're in, right?
No, although that's not going to be irrelevant in April and May here. I do have the Florida Panthers winning. I think at this point, Tampa is on their downslide, right? Obviously, when you win 2 cups and make 3 straight cup finals, you are due for a little bit of slide at some point. Andrei Vasilevsky has looked a little bit more human this year, which is saying something because that man's an alien.
Yeah.
He's looked a little more human this year. The Florida Panthers have been a little bit more of a tighter unit. I have the Panthers winning. I don't see it being a short series.
Definitely not.
I debated between 6 and 7. I have it going 7.
Okay.
And I have Florida pulling it out. I wouldn't be surprised if they take care of Tampa before that.
I was about to say the caveat with a 7, certainly for me it is, and I'm sure it is for you a little bit. A 7-game series to me means you can see it going either way.
Absolutely.
You're doing a coin flip for game 7 to an extent.
Basically,
both teams are good enough to win the series, but I'm giving it 7. And I also wonder this too. Like, so I was a little different than you on this one. I picked Florida also, but I said 6.
Okay. And I considered 6.
Despite that, Tampa is always one of these teams that I wonder about the ability to just flip the switch. They always seem to have that knack, and they started to look a little bit more like that team in the last couple of weeks of the season too. There was something about them that they were playing better than another team we're about to talk about.
See, they were, but I also want to mention that I don't think Tampa has looked the same, and this will come up in our.
I agree with that though.
Well, I don't think Tampa has looked quite the same, and this will come up in our next preview. Since Patrick Maroon left, they just haven't quite looked the exact same. And I think that guy is not a 30-40 goal guy. He's not a 70-80 point guy. But in the playoffs, he's a create room guy. He's a
guy that matters to a roster. I'll give you that.
Yeah. And I haven't seen anybody take that same hold for them. I know they have skill up and down the lineup. I know Nikita Kucherov is maybe the second best player in hockey right now. Like they are an incredible team, and I will not be surprised if they take 2 or 3 games here. That's why I have this being a long series.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, in game 7, you have the team with Matthew Tkachuk and the team that doesn't have Matthew Tkachuk.
I know we're really pushing to try to get this done before game 1 actually starts. Whatever. That's one of the games I'm so interested in, because I think that kind of, if Florida just wins the game, then I think everything that we've said about Florida winning the series kind of holds up. But what if they don't, and then you start to question some stuff? I bet
if Tampa comes out today and wins 3 or 4-0, it's a whole different animal.
Sure.
Throw this prediction directly out the window. Speaking of predictions, we may be throwing directly out the window here. Let's transition over to this other series. So
to the Boston-Toronto series.
If you're a Toronto fan, you know the history. You haven't beat Boston in the postseason since 1959.
I don't need to say I don't need to say anything more about this series than the fact that immediately the morning after this was locked in, you sent me the Dangle video.
Actually, I think you sent the Dangle video out.
Oh no! I did, and I'll tell you why I did. Because somebody sent it to me.
Because he spends the first 90 seconds laughing like the Joker. Now,
the best line in the video, by the way, is he gets to a point where he sits there. He goes, "I can't wait for this," and then goes, "Oh no!" and then goes, "How am I alive? I'm a medical miracle."
And it's true, and I believe it.
It's so funny. It was one of the. I don't know if I've laughed at a video harder than I did at that one when I first saw it. A buddy of mine who's a Bruins fan sent it to me, and I proceeded to pass it along to you and everybody else in our group because it was just too good. It was too good not to. It was the best. It was the best first 2 minutes of a video I've ever seen.
To recap,
game 1.
Well, and then game 1. Yeah, I was so. Steve Dangle is also doing watch-alongs as part of.
I didn't get a chance to do
SDPN
this.
Covered. I stopped in a couple times after the goals, and it was So
I bet.
To recap the more recent history, just in case people don't know, these teams have played in the playoffs 3 times in the last 11 seasons: 2013, 2018, and 2019. All 3 times it went 7 games. All 3 times Boston won.
All 3 times. Game 7 was another disaster for the Toronto Maple Leafs,
including the 2013 where they blew the first 4-1 lead in a Game 7 ever.
That was all in the third period too, wasn't it?
Dude, that's what I mean. A 4-1 third period lead in a Game 7.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. So that team, the only Leaf on that team was Morgan Rielly, the only current Leaf. Going to the 18-19, obviously you have a lot more turnover there. You have your Tavares and your big four, Nylander, Matthews, Marner.
Was Tavares on the team yet at that point?
Yeah.
But
yep.
I think for 19,
for 19.
I was like, for 18, he wasn't, right? Yeah. I was like, 18 was right, because 18 was right down the stretch of his time with the Islanders. Yeah, but you're right about everybody else. The Matthews, Marner, Nylander, like, yeah, that was all happening all at the same time. And it's constantly, that's why it's constantly led to that discussion or whatever. So I don't remember if I hinted with you about this last week or not, but I hinted at something about something or other. I don't know if I actually said it was in this series or not, but I said I had a complete theory based on around this.
Well, a week ago, we thought this series was going to be Toronto, Florida.
We did. Okay, in fairness.
So Boston had to lose their last 2 games of the regular season. Florida
you know what?
It might their last 2 games of the regular season.
Now that I think about it, I know what made me bring it up, and I know exactly how I brought it up to you. Toronto had played Detroit on the Saturday night, and they went down 4-1, got it back tied, lost in overtime, right? But they went down 4-1 in the first period. And I had something in my mind from right then and there, and I'm not blaming this person for the result in game 1 either, but it happened exactly the way that I kind of envisioned it would happen. And if it continues to happen, I sense something else happening. I'll say it that way. Okay. So Toronto started Ilya Samsonov in goal. Samsonov had started that game against Detroit, by the way, and gave up 4 goals in the first period. So, and immediately in my head, and I didn't even know it was going to be Boston yet at this point, but immediately in my head, I went, they roll out Samsonov and he looks like he did in that game. Sheldon Keefe's getting fired after this series.
Man. Okay. Well, and then game 1 happens.
And then game 1 happens and it's Samsonov and they lost 5-1. One of them was
and Samsonov probably wants 2 of those back.
I mean, collectively, if you lose, realistically 4-1, I know it was 5-1 by the end of it, but you get the point. It's everybody. It's not like it's just one. I mean, Austin Matthews, it was still a 1-0 game. Austin Matthews had a wide open net and hit the post.
Yep. Well, and your goal was from your depth, if I recall correctly. Yeah, it was David Camp from Dewar and Reeves.
That's not even the part that doesn't sit with me. It's not that it's a depth guy. It was 4-0 already at that point. So you scored a garbage time goal. Good for you, right? Like, the game was already well in hand at that point because that quickly it turned from 1-0 to 4-0 in the blink of an eye.
Yep.
So don't get me wrong. I still think you're going to get a little bit of a series. I don't think this is a sweep, but I did. The second I saw the matchup, I didn't like it. From Toronto's perspective, I didn't like it. I knew exactly what kind of series I feel like you're in for. I've got Boston in 6.
Okay. Now, see, you say that, and one funny thing about these picks is these picks were made before game 1.
True, and that's why that's why I'm standing by my pick. I'm standing by my pre-game 1 pick.
Absolutely, I am also going to stand behind my pre-game 1 pick. As we sit here, obviously Boston is up 1-0 in the series. You haven't gotten any production out of your top guys. Like I said, Ryan Reeves has more playoff points than Austin Matthews at this point, and I don't expect that to last very long. But as it sits here, Connor Dewar and Reeves have more points than Matthews, Marner, Tavares, and Nylander combined, and that's a problem. I think Toronto's going to figure it out. I think this is over the course of the regular season. I think this is the best their team has looked in the last several years. I think this is better than the teams that have lost to Boston previously. We talked about the fact that they played 3 times in the last 11 years, but I think what we didn't talk about the fact is the last time they played, 2019, was 5 years ago. Yeah. Your core, Matthews, Marner, Nylander, obviously Tavares is a little older, but the 3 young guys were 5 years younger than they currently are.
I think that's what excited me.
Austin Matthews wasn't scoring 70 yet, and I know he still didn't.
Sure.
Sorry, Leafs fans. But I think that as the series progresses, it was game 1 in Boston. It's always going to be emotionally high. It's a Saturday night. It's, you only had 48 hours after the regular season because the NHL is a joke.
I don't hate that part of it. I wish they wouldn't drag out the first round the way they did.
I wish they gave it 2 or 3 days, or 3 or 4 days before you start games. And then, yeah, I agree. Go every other night.
Well, then see, then we could both get the best of both worlds, and you could give them a couple extra days if you wanted to, and then
just go
every other
night.
day. Yeah. What are we doing with this?
No, I agree.
3 days in between games thing. But
well, they wanted games on Saturday night for TV reasons, but then also as we get into the Western Conference, Vancouver had tour dates booked. But anyway, right. That's why the schedule is so funky. Toronto or Vancouver doesn't start until like Monday or Tuesday. It's wild.
Anyway. So, but this is
I have the Toronto Maple Leafs in 7 games.
Interesting. Oh my goodness, a game 7 too.
Game 7 in Boston.
I hear you. Well, hey, if Florida pulled it off last year.
If you're going to be a real team in this league and you're going to pretend like you have superstars and you're going to pretend like you're a Stanley Cup contender, it's time to go now.
Sure.
Yep.
Oh, I understand. I understand it. That's why I gave mine an extra repercussion on it. Not only do they lose the series, but if the reason they lose the series is the goaltending is garbage, and at the very least, I'm not saying it's the complete answer, but Samsonov's been up and down all season. Had a terrible start, found his game again, and now it looks like he's coming, like regressing back again. You've got Joseph Wall sitting there.
Who also hasn't been great.
Hasn't been great, but better numbers. And it feels like you're putting in the guy based on the veteranship. And if it's not working after a certain point, if you stand by the other guy and are stubborn about it because he's the veteran, I think you're just as liable.
Don't make the same mistake Boston did last year. Yep.
Of which, by the way, Jeremy Swayman was outstanding.
Jeremy Swayman was great.
Outstanding. This, by the way, totally the right call. He's definitely the number 1 in this. We'll see what kind of happens moving forward if they stay on that rotation. But
if I'm wrong and Boston wins this series and goes on a little bit of a run, Swayman's going to get some Conn Smythe love.
Depending on how far they go, sure. By the way, one more thing before we wrap that portion of it and we go to the West and all stuff like that is that this is what you just said about like the fact that it's been 5 years. That's exactly what excited me about the fact that these two were meeting in the first.
Me too.
Is like, it's been a while. As soon as you saw this line up the way that it did, it's like, oh, we're getting Bruins Leafs in the first round.
And a lot of the bones are still the same, right? On one side, you still have Marchand, Pasternak, McAvoy. On the other side, you still have Matthews, Marner, Tavares, Nylander. Like, the bones are the same, but the teams are just different enough that I think this is going to be a great series. And even though Boston kind of ran away game 1, I can't see the whole series going like that. So.
Well, just wait until it eventually shifts over to Toronto as well. Like,
exactly,
you got 2 games in each location.
Exactly. That's the beauty of the playoffs, is that there's a lot of games left. So, all right, as we transition over into the Western Conference, we're going to take another quick little break here. We'll be right back. All right, and we're back with our Western Conference playoff preview. We're going to start in the Central Division. Continuing with our theme here, we're going to start with our division winners, which leads us to, maybe my favorite matchup of the first round.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't
honestly, we have the Dallas Stars and the Vegas Golden Knights. And the Dallas Stars are the division winner, by the way. They're going to have home ice in this if you're not paying attention. Vegas has, it looks like they're going to get Mark Stone back.
Yeah, they are.
Tomas Hertl came back with a couple games left in the regular season. Pietrangelo might play. It looks like we're going to get pretty close to Vegas at full power here.
Yeah.
If not for game 1, definitely by game 2 or 3. Like, by the time we go back to Vegas, it looks like they're going to be pretty ready to go here.
Yeah. We'll see for the injury purposes and things like that.
Of course. This is a real matchup, Kevin. Who you got here? This is some heavyweights.
So I'm going to, the best way I can put for who I've gotten this one is if you followed along long enough, you know my thoughts on one of these teams in particular, both my thoughts on their team construction, and also you know who I picked from preseason.
I don't remember who you picked from preseason. Was it Vegas?
No, I picked Dallas.
You picked Dallas in preseason. Okay.
Yeah, so I have Dallas in 6 in this one. And I've definitely highlighted enough times over the years of doing the show. I love Dallas's core. I also think they were getting hot at the right time too to go along with it. So I'm very, very interested in this series in general, and I think it's going to be a really good one.
I think Vegas is going to bring out the big guns. They always do. Game 3 presentation in Vegas is going to be crazy.
Oh, that's for sure. I'm not doubting that.
I think this is a long series. I don't think either one of these teams is getting out of here in 5 or less.
For sure.
The goaltending is fantastic. You have Aiden Hill on one side and Jake Ottinger on the other, who isn't getting enough love for the Vezina, but probably should be in the conversation.
Jake Ottinger, by the way, so Vegas went through Dallas last year in the playoffs as part of their run to the Cup.
Yep.
And I think that series sits with Dallas a lot. That's another reason why I like Dallas in the series, is because I think Ottinger's gotten better. I think it sits with the rest of them. Oh, by the way, let's throw in the fact that Dallas was playing as well as they were going into the playoffs and getting to that point against Vegas with, Wyatt Johnston was just some rookie at that point. He is now turning into more and more of a star.
Full-blown star in this league. Absolutely. Right? He scored 30 this year, didn't he?
Yeah, exactly. And not to mention the fact that everybody else for Dallas that's a veteran still keeps doing it. It's still, Joe Pavelski's still good. Tyler Seguin's still good. Jamie Benn is still good. And then you throw in all of the other cornerstone pieces. It's like,
we have talked on this show before about Dallas has done a fantastic job of transitioning from the Tyler Seguin, Jamie Benn era into the post Tyler Seguin and Jamie Benn era, where they are still veteran leaders on that team. They still provide kind of those middle 6 minutes. Jamie Benn still plays a lot of tough minutes.
Yeah.
But they've done a great job of transitioning to your Jason Robertsons, your Rope Hintzes, your Wyatt Johnstons. Miro Heiskanen is an absolute animal on the back end. The Dallas Stars are a juggernaut.
Yeah.
And so is Vegas. Don't get me wrong. Like, they're the defending Stanley Cup champions and got better for a reason, right? Like, they're the defending Stanley Cup champions plus Noah Hannafin and Thomas Hertl.
Right. Oh, hello? I know. It's the thing about Dallas though is exactly that. It's like, how a couple of years ago it was like, this is Colorado's time. It just feels like Colorado's time. There's something about Dallas right now that there's something that it feels like it's time. They're getting closer to having that same thing, that young core that just is ready to take that step. I feel it. And I felt like they're deep, and I felt like they were playing really well as it came down to it. It wasn't as simple as, we're going to shift gears very quickly here in just a few moments to the other series out of this division. Yeah. And both of those teams, I think, kind of down the stretch went through it a little bit. Had a little bit of this is a little bit of a slide, and now they're going to play each other, which is interesting. But
very interesting.
But I felt like out of any of the teams that we're talking about, Dallas was the one that kind of was in the right place at the right time. Like, the play is looking good. Feels like they're heating up. I've liked them from the beginning of the year. I've liked them for years anyway, and I'm sticking to that. So
okay, and you have them winning in Game 6 in Vegas.
I have Dallas in 6. Yeah, I have them. Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up, but I have them going into the Fortress and winning. Yes,
I also have Dallas. I do have it going 7, just because I think if this was your conference final, I don't think anybody would be upset about it. The fact that we're getting it in the first round when both teams are, relatively healthy. Obviously, Vegas is kind of working their way back towards healthy, but you haven't gone through the playoff gauntlet yet. I think this is going to be really, 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 really high quality hockey.
Yeah,
I cannot wait to watch it. Okay.
Oh, I can't either.
Let's talk about some slightly less high quality hockey, although it will still probably be very good. We have the Colorado Avalanche and the Winnipeg Jets.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I'm gonna rip the Band-Aid off on this one.
Go ahead.
The Winnipeg Jets are phonies. Avs in 6.
Wow. It's straight up. They're phonies. That's your answer. Okay. I'm not going that far with it. We are in agreement on the team that wins the series. I have Colorado in it as well, but I do have. Okay. I'm going to tell you who's not a phony. And this is part of what goes into my decision.
Connor Hellebuyck?
Connor Hellebuyck is certainly not. He's going to win the Vezina this year, probably. And as such, I have this as a long series because I just don't know. And I don't know if this would it's not enough for me to change it. It didn't change anything to begin with. But now that Colorado is also going to be down Jonathan Drouin for the first round as well. Interesting tidbit. I do like Colorado, I think, has more players. I'm not taking away from Winnipeg and some of the talent they have, but I think Colorado has more take over the game players. Like I just know at some point in time we're gonna watch a game and McKinnon's gonna be the star.
Yep.
Not that he isn't a star in general, but you know what I mean. He's just gonna be the guy who you sit there and you go, well, McKinnon just took this one over. That's why they're winning.
So Connor Hellebuyck's not a phony, but I think essentially their entire defensive core is.
I can understand where you're coming from with
Josh Morrissey, phony. Neil Pionk, phony. Nate Schmidt, phony.
So you took Colorado in 6. I've got Colorado in 7.
And so I only had 2 series going less than 6, and they were both in the Metro. This was the other one I was tempted to go 5 on. I think Colorado takes care of business on this. I think if Colorado's up 3-1 going back to Colorado for game 5, it's done.
Well, no, going back to Winnipeg for game 5.
Oh, you're right. I'm sorry. Winnipeg has home ice on this one.
Yeah, so I thought that's
no, you're right.
I thought that's exactly what you were doing with.
Well, then I think that's the only reason it's getting to 6.
Right. I thought that's what you were doing with the 6. Is that means they would win it on home ice. I have them winning it on the road actually in game 7. That's how convinced I am of it and things like that they'll still win the series. But I do think it's a longer series, so I'm going 7 on that one.
I think the defensive core is just so heavily in Colorado's favor. They might have the best defensive core we've seen in a long time.
Honestly, and so now we've kind of revealed that we both picked the same 2 teams to win this or whatever.
Yeah.
It was never gonna be this way, obviously, because of the way the divisions are and the way the playoff structure is after the first round. Thanks, Gary. I would have totally pegged this as a conference final a few weeks ago. I'm not super confident on that now. I still love Dallas, obviously, but I'm not super confident on Colorado anymore. But that being said, like going as far, but that being said, I still have them making the second round.
I don't think the Colorado Avalanche, or I'm sorry, I don't think the Winnipeg Jets have a single take over the game player, and Colorado's got at least 2 or 3.
Kyle Connor's the closest thing I think they've got.
Yeah, and match up Kyle Connor and Nathan McKinnon 1-on-1.
Well, sure. Like
Kyle Connor runs through him like a freight train.
Well, because Kyle Connor probably slots into the same tier as Mikko, and Mikko Rantanen's a great player. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah, of course.
McKinnon's clearly a level above that. Is all I'm saying.
Right, and then you also have Cale Makar who can take over the game from the back end. Like,
sure.
I think Winnipeg's just outgunned here. All right, that is going to do it for our Central Division. We have one more division left. That is the Pacific. We'll be right back. All right. Thank you guys for sticking with us. We have our last division here. We're in the Pacific Division. I know there's a Central team in here, but this was the division won by the Vancouver Canucks. So let's start with them and the Nashville Predators. Kevin, who you got in this one?
I wanted this to be tougher than it turned out to be. I felt like this could have been potentially a really good, close series. And I don't get me wrong. Not saying it's going to be short on games, but there's just an element of competitiveness. Like I'm not really giving one team as much of a shot in this as I could.
Okay.
I think Nashville went so crazy with the point streak that it's starting to fade. And I kind of wanted to believe down the stretch too that Vancouver wasn't playing as well. And it's like, oh, well, so maybe this was all a little bit, like they're coming back to earth now too. Cause they also really were above expectations with the division win and all stuff like that. I think don't overthink this. I got Vancouver in 6.
I also have Vancouver. I also have 6 games. We talked a little bit about the Washington Capitals kind of coming in with a head of steam because they've been playing meaningful games for a month and, they may be able to snag a game off the Rangers, blah, blah, blah. I think Nashville, first of all, I think this matchup is a little bit closer than the Rangers and the Capitals are. So I think you're more likely to get some better games.
I agree with that.
A little more likely to steal a couple, especially once you go back to Nashville. This is also the series with the most travel in the first round, so that is worth mentioning as well. You are jumping across a couple of timelines. That being said, though, I think Vancouver just has the guns. I think Nashville blew it a little bit too early. You were very, very hot, and if the playoffs started 2 weeks ago, I would pick Nashville to beat just about any team in the league. But as it sits here, they have had the opportunity to kind of sputter just a little bit. They're still, still obviously a good team, still put themselves in that playoff position.
Yeah.
But I think they no longer have the big old steam engine behind them quite as much. And I think they may be able to take a couple of games here, but I do have Vancouver moving on in 6.
I do think so. By the way, I do think also there's an element that's fascinating because there's only one Canadian team on the east side and there's 3 on this west side. And we've already talked about one of them. We got another one to get to before we're done with the Pacific side of this.
Yep.
And I sure hope that this is another reason why I'm kind of hoping I'm right about this. I love the atmosphere that happens when you get playoff games in Nashville. I love it.
Oh yeah, it's great.
But I do think like Vancouver, I think is the better team right now. I think they've had the better season. I think that's going to continue. And I do think it's interesting, like somewhere along the way, there was certainly no way I was going to pick against all 4 of them in the first round not when you have at least one division winner and 2 others that are the higher seed in their matchup. I couldn't pick against all of them. That's not a teaser, by the way.
Okay.
For what it's worth.
Right. But you also have Vancouver in this one?
Yeah, I do. Well, because I think at the end of the day, Vancouver's gotten a little bit, I think probably gotten a little bit more from their depth than Nashville has. Like Nashville, and to be honest, I just am a little put off by the last couple, because we watched a Nashville game closely because of the matchup against Pittsburgh and how it mattered to the Flyers playoff run. And I didn't like what I saw in that game. I just didn't love what I saw. And I'm like, wait until you play. Like Pittsburgh wasn't making the playoffs without some help. Wait until you play a team that is
a real playoff team.
And you've also just got to factor in the fact that, like, I know I just said with the last segment that Hellebuck's winning the Vezina, and I believe that.
Okay.
But for a while, Thatcher Demko was very much in that conversation. He's played really well this year. Quinn Hughes is probably getting the Norris.
Rick Puckett's probably getting the Jack Adams.
Yeah, but let's remember what we always say about that award.
You weren't supposed to be as good as you are. Well, but I think that's true, though, because after the year they had last year, Vancouver did not have the expectations of winning the division. And for the first 30, 40, 50 games, they were one of the best teams in the West.
Sure. And I just think there's also an element where too many guys have had too good of a year for it to just be first round and done.
I agree.
You've watched the way Besser's played, you've watched the way Miller's played, you've watched the way Pettersson's played. Like too many guys. And
playoff JT Miller is a problem.
I'm going to tell you right now, I don't even think that's where it stops. I think playoff Brock Besser is going to be a big issue.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And I love it because I'm not even mentioning Pettersson out of that, and yet I think that
I think of their core, his game translates the least well to playoff success, but I think he is still going to be very, very good. Don't get me wrong.
Oh yeah.
I like Vancouver a lot, but I'm really more excited to talk about their second round matchup once we get there. So let's flip over and talk about the other matchup so we can see who may play the Canucks if they should go through. Over on the other side here, we have the Edmonton Oilers and the LA Kings.
Yeah.
Man.
This was tough.
Man. I think this series is going at least 6. I think I had 7 on my bracket here.
I have 7. This was so tough to pick because all of the factors are in play, because it's, first of all, by the way, you can correct me if I'm wrong from just trying to do it off of memory, but this was a first round matchup last year, was it not?
Yes. Yep. And I think they played in the second round the year before that. I think this is the third year in a row they're playing the playoffs.
And the thing is that when it comes down to it, LA ends up being so consistent in these situations, and then Edmonton is always the wild card of sorts, where it's like, what are you going to get? What goaltending are you going to get? How's McDavid going to look? How's everybody else going to look? What kind of situation is it?
And none of those questions are different this year, because you have that same Edmonton Oilers team with no real goaltending, but they tend to outscore their problems. And you're going against a team that has Kopitar, Dubois, Deneau down the middle.
When you say it that way, yeah.
Right, exactly. And Pierre-Luc Dubois has not had the world's best season. And if he wants to stay in LA, he better get motivated real quick.
Sure. I think the fact that you also bring up, you brought up Kopitar already, but even Doughty's still giving you the quality that you expect. So the veterans are still there. I think that really what you've seen Adrian Kempe come even more into his own this year. What a solid player he is. They've gotten really good goaltending throughout the course of the year. Got to factor that in.
Yep.
It's really tough.
Who you got?
I just don't know if I can pick against the superstars. I'm picking Edmonton in 7, but obviously, like I said, with the 7, it's a coin flip thing. So I'm going with it for now, but I wouldn't pick the other way.
You and I were so boring this year because I also picked the Edmonton Oilers, which means we have 7 of the 8 matchups the same.
I'm going to be willing to guarantee that once we get to the next round, if all of these are correct, we're not going to pick the same team.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And don't worry, stick around for a minute. We'll do cup winners before we get out of here. But yeah, I agree. I think Edmonton, for the first several years of his career, Connor McDavid was a really, really, really good player who was putting up points, putting up goals, putting up assists. As he's gotten older, as he's matured a little bit, he's here to win.
I think that there's definitely going to be some sense of You kind of said it with Toronto too. With Toronto, it better happen because there's more maturity involved to it.
Well,
I think
Draisaitl's only got 1 year left, right?
Right. I think in Edmonton, they know they've got to start to put it together sometime soon.
If you don't see a big success out of the Edmonton Oilers this year, I think you look at trading Leon Draisaitl, as crazy as that sounds.
I think Edmonton also, though, you don't go out and continue to move forward with Evander Kane and they bring Corey Perry in. And it's like, you got these guys who I think you're trying to be built for the playoffs.
I forgot Corey Perry was there. Oh, no, that's going to be a problem in the playoffs.
But like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't think you do this and build like that if you don't intend to make a run.
I think you got Corey Perry just to piss Drew Doughty off. Let's be honest.
Possibly, sure.
Like, there's a real possibility that you got him specifically for Drew Doughty.
But either way, that's my take on it. So yeah, we'll revisit this in the second round and see how right we were, and then
I do have the Oilers there. I do have the Oilers in 7 on that.
Perfect.
All right. That does it for our kind of first round predictions here.
Yeah, we can just wrap it up from here. We don't have to go another.
Before we get out of there, Kevin.
Yes.
Let's put it on the record here. April 21st, 2021. Couple of playoff games have happened, but most of round 1 is still really yet to kick off.
Right.
Who's your Stanley Cup winner?
Well, I'm sticking with my preseason. So I had Dallas winning it from the preseason. I was massively wrong about the team coming out of the East. I had the New Jersey Devils coming out of the East.
Okay.
So I was massively wrong on that account, but I've been saying Dallas all season, so I'm sticking with Dallas.
We don't have to get into the details on it, but who do you have coming out of the East? Who do the Stars beat in the Stanley Cup final?
From who made it, you mean?
Yeah.
I ultimately went with, and people aren't going to like this answer for the type of show we usually are. I have Florida going back.
Okay. I also have the Dallas Stars winning the Stanley Cup this year. As we sit here on April 21st, I see the path for them. They get by Vegas. I think they can beat Arizona, or they can beat Colorado, getting in further than that. I think in the Stanley Cup final, you're going to have the Dallas Stars defeating the Carolina Hurricanes.
I knew you were going to go there. And
I think it's time.
Well,
we talked about teams and it being time. Carolina's been knocking on the door for 4 or 5 years now, and I think it's time for them to make a real serious run. Yep.
You're not far off from where my thinking was at with some stuff. Let's just say that much. So,
all right.
Now comes the good part, the fun part. We now have to sit back and actually see how this all plays out, because we can talk about predictions all we want to.
Absolutely.
Somewhere in this, we're going to be wrong.
Absolutely. And the great news is, if you've been listening to us for a while, you do know that we go to every other week in the off season. As we kind of have it prepped right now, we tentatively have plans to do shows kind of between each playoff round. Usually ends up working about every other week, so it won't be too different if you've been around for a while. But make sure to hit subscribe so that when that next episode does drop, it'll get submitted wherever you listen to your podcast. Follow us on YouTube, subscribe over there, hit the little bell, and you'll get notified when the episode goes live. Follow us on Twitter. We're at YWT Podcast. I'll be tweeting from that account. Kevin will be tweeting from at Kevin_Durso.
As much as I can, but yeah.
Of course. Find us everywhere you find your podcast, including sportstalkphilly.com. And man, Kevin, let's go watch some playoff hockey. We got
Sounds good.
4 games ahead of us today. It's time to go. It's like Christmas.
Yep.
All right. We're out of here. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. We'll see you.